If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this,
Tell me your scariest, most bizarre, and strangest paranormal sightings, unexplainable glitches, or weird ghostly encounters that still give you chills.
if you asked my sisters, it would be the spooky old non-working grandfather clock my parents decorated with in the living room. The clock would chime late at night, and the hands would always be set to 3:33, even if changed. At times, the door to the clock would open slightly, revealing one of my sister's dolls within. This went on for a few years until my parents sold it. If you asked me, I would say that my sisters never realized the obvious truth that I was the one messing with them. I was alone in my 2-story house and stayed behind because I was sick and my family went to visit a friend of my dad's. I was reading in the living room, back when I used to read a lot, when at noon on the dot came what sounded like footsteps upstairs, really noticeable due to the hardwood floors up there. I brushed it off for about 2 seconds when they slowly walked to the room right above me, stopping exactly above me. I stared at the ceiling, horrified, trying to figure out what it could be, but my pets were outside, no one was home, and the upstairs windows were painted shut. Then came 2 stomps, while whatever it was above me in that room before silence. I honestly waited a good hour before working up the courage to go check it out. I found my shoes in that spot, neatly put together with toes pointed in my direction. I'm still uncertain about what transpired. Once a few friends and I were house sitting for one of their family friends. We showed up, and it was a nice apartment with stairs right next to the front door, and I quickly noticed a cute black cat sitting on the steps just watching us. We went through the house just admiring, and I played with the cat a little. Soon we came back downstairs and had some pizza ready and some drinks, and we were going to put a movie on. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a small black figure move behind the couch clear as day. I followed to go say hi to the cat once more, and as I kneeled behind the couch, I didn't see anything. I quickly looked up at my then girlfriend with a slightly worried look, and she had the same look on her face. As I'm about to get up, the real cat jumped down the stairs on the other side of the room. Immediately my heart started pounding, and my ex took my hand, and we got out of there. We told our friends, and nobody stayed in the apartment that night. I saw that black orb/figure, and I think about it quite often. We were the first family to live in my newly built childhood home. But the area around my home was strange. Just up the street, about a 10-minute walk, was a family graveyard with stones dating back to the 1880s. The neighborhood was built around it so the people buried there were never exhumed. I've never done research, but someone told me it was a farm. 1. There were weird things that happened in my house I couldn't really explain. Nothing overtly paranormal, just really weird things. One time I and a friend were sitting at the small counter/stove that was located in the middle of the kitchen. We're waiting for mac and cheese to cook when out of nowhere a marble drops between us from the ceiling and rolls onto the floor. We both instinctively look up, and there's nothing there. Nowhere a marble could have come from. Just a blank white ceiling. 2. Another time I was sitting at my desk on my computer with my headphones on. My bedroom was set up so against one wall was my desk, my bed, and then an armoire with a bunch of stuffed animals on top of it. I felt something hit me in the side of the face, so I looked up, and one of my stuffed animals was sitting on the made bed next to me. I thought my mom had thrown it and looked over, but no one was there. I could hear my mom vacuuming the kitchen downstairs, so there was no way she had thrown something and in a space of a second ended up downstairs. We were the only 2 home. 3. One night my family was in the basement watching a movie. After it ended, we all heard footsteps walking above us on the first floor. My dad thought someone had broken in, so he grabbed his gun and went up to check things out. No one was there. 4. I got a cat when I turned 18. The cat was very skittish. Having never owned a cat before, I wasn't very familiar with their temperament but thought it was normal that she would always hide. I was a bit disappointed because I loved her and wanted to be with her, but she was content hiding in my parents' bedroom under the bed. We moved out when I was about 25 to a new house. Once we got into the new house, it was like a complete 180 happened. Suddenly she was this friendly, vocal cat that never hid. She was always either lying out in the living room in a sunbeam or lying on a chair. She suddenly was very tolerant of people, loved being around me and my family, and even houseguests. It was like a new cat. Something in the house had to be scaring her. Last year, my family and I were living in a townhouse, and we had a neighboring couple who lived with one of the spouse's mothers. They would constantly fight, and it would unfortunately get physical. We had to call the police on the husband several times. Well, they intended to move, and their 2 daughters took a liking to my daughter and decided to give her one of their dolls. It was an older, blonde Barbie-style doll. Shortly after my wife took it upstairs and put it away, we were all in the living room, our cat included, and we heard thumping and crashing coming from our daughter's bedroom. I was on shift working from home at the time, so my wife went to check and found nothing out of sorts. Nothing appeared to have actually toppled. No one in our closets, rooms, or the bathroom. We thought it was incredibly odd but didn't think too much of it. The crashing occurred again later, and nothing was there. Later that evening, my wife was with our infant son upstairs in our bed when she began to hear sobbing and sounds like a baby crying coming from our daughter's room. Our cat lay in the hallway, staring into the room with perked ears. My wife got up, told me about the situation, grabbed the doll, and tossed it into the dumpster outside. We never had an issue before or since with that room for the remainder of our stay there. Pretty much my entire life has been filled with weird/unusual/unexplainable/creepy encounters, TBH, but I'll only mention the worst one. The scariest unexplainable experience I've ever had was at a friend's house. I visited her only once for a sleepover in 9th grade, and then never again. The second I stepped foot into their home, I wanted to walk right back out. The air inside felt dark and heavy. I immediately felt tense and like I was in danger just being there. But I convinced myself it was in my head and decided that I could always just call my mom to come pick me up if anything awful happened. My friend took me on a brief tour of the house, the kitchen, family room, garage, bathroom, and her parents' bedrooms. They stayed in separate rooms, were all on the ground floor. Her mom's room was in the back corner of the house, and I remember feeling very strongly that I shouldn't go near it. I could see from the hallway that the wall was covered floor to ceiling in shelves filled with dolls. It was ducking creepy. The top floor of their home had a bathroom, her sister's large bedroom. For some strange reason she slept in the master bedroom? Their family was weird, and my friend's bedroom, which was basically an attic/bonus room with an angled ceiling, directly above the garage. Her room had 2 doors, one leading to her sister's bedroom and the other to a narrow staircase that descended to the ground floor, while her bed was positioned against the wall far from both doors. We hung out in her room for a few hours on her bed, with her cat sleeping next to us on the bed. We watched anime, did some drawing, chatted, etc. Somehow we eventually moved on to the subject of her parents being in 2 separate rooms, and I confessed that I was really freaked out by her mom's bedroom and that it felt wrong. My friend looked a little surprised, then quietly agreed that she felt the same way and never went into the room. She then told me that the house used to be owned by her mom's brother and that he actually ended himself in that room. Before I had a chance to react or process this, something knocked 3 times very deliberately and heavily on the wall next to our heads. To this day I don't know how that happened, because there was only open air on the other side of that wall, with no possible way to access it without an extremely long ladder. We both screamed and jumped off the bed. Not even 5 seconds later, one of her closed doors banged open, and her mom's cat ran into the room, headed straight for me, and started attacking me. My friend's cat leapt off her bed, tackled her mom's pet, and they started fighting each other like crazy while we both stood there and just screamed. Eventually her sister stormed into the room and took their mom's cat to another part of the house. We were so freaked out, we barely slept. And I never went back. So I was exploring this abandoned munitions factory called Remington Arms. Remington produced a huge amount of the ammo used in World War I, and several people died there in all sorts of accidents. Anyway, I and my friends were walking around, and we kept hearing whispers and seeing things out of the corners of our eyes, so we used a parabolic mic and tried to talk to whatever was there. One of the recordings the mic picked up was "Get out" in a creepy voice. So we kept exploring and ended up climbing the 6-story shot tower that overlooked the city. The view was wonderful up there. On the way down I slipped off the ladder rung and started falling backwards. I felt something shove me hard back towards the ladder, and I grabbed back onto it. My friends were at the bottom already, and I looked, and there was nothing behind me. If I fell, I definitely would have been seriously maimed or killed because there was jagged metal at the bottom. Also, when we looked at all the pictures we took, there were the green mist-like orbs in all of them. The experience wasn't particularly terrifying, yet it genuinely frightened me. I was about 12 years old. I stayed up by myself pretty late playing video games in our living room. It was maybe about 2 a.m. when our stove hood fan thing in the kitchen clicked on. It had a button that you had to push in pretty firmly in order to turn it on. Initially, I thought it to be odd. I walked over and shut it off. I got back to playing video games when it turned right again. This time, with a lot more apprehension, I went into the kitchen to see what was going on. I thought maybe my dad was messing with me. I looked around the corner, behind the fridge, and in our laundry room, and nobody was there. I turned it off and went back into the living room. Almost immediately after sitting down, I hear the audible click and the fan humming at full speed. I was so freaked out I ran into the nearest bedroom, where my grandma stayed. She asked me what was going on, and I told her about it. She got up, went into the kitchen, and shut it off, came back, and about 5 minutes later, it came again. We both agreed that we wouldn't go back in there until morning. The next morning my grandma got a call that one of her brothers had passed the night before. Whether it's a coincidence or not, the news still terrifies me. Also, that fan is used daily by my mom, and it has never done what it did that night again. When my son was born, we were living in a house that had significant issues. We gutted and remodeled the entire interior, walls, floors, and electrical, and redid it all ourselves. My stepson started seeing a man in his closet around this time as well. We had experienced water and electric issues as well, usually corresponding with an argument. When my son was born, the occurrences changed immediately. Little toys and plush toys would turn on, make noise, or start playing. The first time, I turned the toy off. The same toy turned back on. I threw it outside after turning it off a few times. The following night, another toy repeated the same process. It increased until the crescendo, my husband being arrested, and a constant sporadic loud message being played at increasing volume. It took weeks for me to locate the source of the bizarre static radio-type noise with a male voice mumbling in the background. It was a long-forgotten phone/answering machine sitting buried on a shelf in our dining room. It wasn't plugged in, but the phone cord was wired into the wall. I ripped it out. There were many other occurrences. Talking through the unplugged radio scared off a few of my son's caregivers, and the constant feeling of being watched from the dining room. My husband, a 6 feet 4 inches ironworker, saw a large black figure that was bigger than him walking down the hallway into my stepson's room. He hid under the covers. I think the area had some bad vibes. Our neighbor, also my colleague, had increasing mental health symptoms until she committed suicide. She swore it was the land. Her husband was a pastor at a large Hispanic church. When I was 9 or 12 years old, I would stay on an island in Lake of the Woods, Canada, at a haunted mansion with my family and cousins. This wasn't your typical nice mansion, it had a very peculiar layout. It resembled a complex, where various buildings were arranged in close proximity on a stunning lake. 4 people died at this place. 2 died of old age, and 1 died of hypothermia after falling through the ice while snowmobiling on their honeymoon. The last was a kid who would have been around my age at the time, 9 to 12. He died during a family photo when he fell and hit his head on some rocks. We know this because the family has a book documenting their history and listing all the people who have stayed in the cabin over the years. I was sleeping with my mom one night because my dad was snoring. I thought she was next to me, so I didn't question her when something hit me in the head. I just thought it was her adjusting. It turns out it was one of the string blinds from across the room, which I thought was weird but didn't exactly make me scared. Then it happened again 30 seconds later. It made no sense that the blinds were popping off one by one and nailing me in the head. The force of the blinds striking me was beyond the power of wind. It felt more akin to a toss. I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. Turns out my mom was not next to me the whole time. 5 minutes later, a lamp that was bolted to the bed frame above my head also fell and hit me. At that moment, I lost my composure and sprinted to retrieve my mom. She came to bed and 5 minutes later, she was also hit by one of the singular blinds from across the room. I honestly couldn't help but laugh at that point. The only other weird thing that would happen is that faucets would turn on by themselves. My family always said it was the ghost of the kid who died in the family photo that was around my age playing with me. Glitch, alternate reality, WTF did I see? When I was young, I saw something really strange. I was running late for high school and took a path I had taken hundreds of times. It's just a street that ends on the side of a park that is surrounded by a wall. It's like a big T, the top part being the wall, and you can either turn left or right. Walking just ahead of me, there was a man with short hair and a backpack. Instead of turning left or right, he just walked towards the wall. The wall is about 7 feet tall on the side of the road but just about 2 feet tall on the other side, so you can easily see from the roadside people walking in the park, the benches, etc. This guy didn't walk through the wall. It looked like he was still walking, like one of those things you see in video games where a character is stuck against a wall and starts walking just a few feet above the ground, then he vanished. I was shocked. I ran towards the wall and looked around, no trace. I was not high enough to look clearly into the park, so I just assumed that I was tired and he just climbed the wall weirdly. A few years later I was in the area and noticed the same guy walking just in front of me, different outfit but same bag, same haircut, and I don't know, I just knew it was him. so I followed him to that same place, and the same shit happened again. I nearly lost it. It took me a few seconds to compose myself, and I ran to the wall. I was not able to jump to the other side, but I was able to grab the edge and take a look. He was not there, and there was nowhere to hide, just grass, some thin trees, and a bench. The thing about the person is that both times I saw him, I noticed he knew where he was going, so I ran towards the park entrance that was just about 40 yards away and went in the same direction, trying to intercept him. On the other side, there is a big plaza, again nowhere to hide, and strangely, at that hour, it was nearly empty. No trace of him, not by the road, not at the end of the street. I mean, he was wearing a very particular outfit, easy to spot, but he was gone. About 3 years ago, during my time in graduate school, I would attend class every Wednesday until approximately 11:30 p.m. One night when I came home, my husband was a little unnerved and said the oddest thing happened to him. He said when he was in the basement after putting our kiddos in bed, ages 11 and 7, he heard the oddest thing. He said the tune that the nurse in the movie Kill Bill whistles, now I know is called Twisted Root, sounded like the wind or something was whistling. He said it started out slowly and didn't sound human. I didn't know what to think about this, I was too tired to really freak out. So this event is pretty much forgotten by me, as I could not explain it, still can't and don't care, and I was in the basement home with just myself and my sleeping baby, who was upstairs when I heard the oddest noise. It started out as, like, a soft, windy whispering, then began to take more shape and form, becoming recognizable as that tune from Kill Bill when the nurse is coming to kill the bride. It didn't sound like human whistling, but like if the wind became cognizant and could whistle. Anyway, I didn't feel scared, but I did turn around and try to sort out where this could be coming from. This melody lasted probably not more than 20 seconds, then it was gone, and the house was completely quiet again. I called my husband and told him that the same thing happened to me as it did to him. He was a little freaked out by more curiosity, as we had both remembered and discussed how this tune had been the ringtone on the phone of the man who introduced us, who was his best friend, and my step-uncle, a long story. The unsettling aspect is that this man had been dead for at least 2 years by that time. He ended himself at least 2 years prior to this. He always tried to scare you, so it could be him. Back when I was 14, I was walking back from the store with my family. It was the middle of the afternoon in the summer. We lived down a smallish side street connected to a fairly busy main road. Our house was on one end of the road, but we entered from the opposite. My brothers both bolted down the street as soon as we turned the corner to try to beat each other home. We only had one gaming system at the time, and it went to whoever got there first. By the time they reached the other end of the road, almost to our house, my parents had just turned onto the street with my baby sister. I was in the middle of both parties by myself, in my own little world listening to music. I remember staring at the ground while I was walking, just totally zoning out, when I had the strongest urge to look up. When I did, I saw something to this day I still can't explain or understand. Kitty corner to our property was the driveway of a neighbor, and standing just at the edge was something. It was tall, at a good estimate 7 to 8 feet tall. It was solid black but had an almost human shape to it. It was slightly hunched forward and kind of looked like it was wearing robes. I never saw a face. I stopped and stared at this thing for maybe about 5 seconds before it bolted at an inhuman speed across the road to our next door neighbor's driveway. His driveway was L-shaped, and our car was parked at the end of it. This thing disappeared in front of our car, and I waited for it to appear on the other side. It never did. In front of our car, there was a huge, overgrown prickle bush, I don't know its actual name, and surrounding our home was a tall 6-foot wooden fence. I would have seen if this thing had tried to hop the fence or go through the bush, as the rustling would have been obvious. When it didn't reappear, I raced to our car to see if it was hiding, but I honestly knew it was pointless as this thing was huge, and I should have been able to see it regardless. I checked all around and in our car, and this thing just disappeared into thin air. No one else in my family witnessed what I did that day. I have never seen it again. I think about this day often. I was and still am healthy physically and mentally. I wasn't dehydrated or experiencing anything that might set off a hallucination. That said, I won't rule out that maybe something in my mind went haywire that day to make me see things. I am a firm believer in the paranormal, but I also do try and logic things out before jumping to crazy conclusions. In a house we lived in while I was in high school, I woke up at 3:37 a.m. almost every night. Occasionally there was a tall shadow figure in my room. I only saw it about 4 times, but every time I saw it, it had gotten closer to me until the time it was standing over me, leaning over with its head less than a foot from mine. There was something that would mimic our voices late at night too. My mom heard it mimicking me first. I woke up at that time one night and watched my bedroom door close. It was already closed when I went to sleep, so this thing also opened it, and thought I heard my dad say something. Checked with him in the morning, and he hadn't been anywhere near my room. The last time I woke up at 3:37, I was an adult now, and we lived in a different house. I woke up because it sounded like someone had thrown their full weight against the wall next to me. I thought maybe I had hit my head or kneed the wall in my sleep, but nothing hurt. And the other side of the wall was outside. Even if something was thrown against the side of the house, it wouldn't make the sound that it did. Now that I think about it, it was more of a bang coming from inside the wall. There was this one time when I was around 12, and my parents were helping out with a ceremony called the Amitabha Triple Contemplation Service to pray and chant to your ancestors and wandering spirits to be reincarnated into a better world. My dad was asked if he could go buy toys for the spirits of children and fetuses for the ceremony to persuade them to go to a better life. My dad went out to buy these toys, baby bottles, and milk, and placed them on the altar on the ground so the children's spirits could play with them. Once the ceremony was over, my dad didn't know what to do with the toys, so he brought them back home for my cousin, who was around 3 to 4 years old. The next day, I and my dad went on a trip to visit people with the headmaster and my dad's friend that attend the event. While in the car, my dad asked about the toys, and the master said to dispose of them by giving them away or throwing them in the trash. My dad was horrified and asked what to do if you brought them home. The master warned us that we had to quickly gather them and dispose of the toys, but before we do, we must tell them that we are giving them the toys and not taking them back since they were not ours to keep. My dad quickly called my mom to gather the toys from my aunt's house. She then talked to my aunt and found out that the toys have been gathered since strange occurrences have happened in the house ever since they had the toys. My cousin would stay up the night looking around and laughing by herself with the toys. She would also randomly start crying and get agitated. Once my dad knew that the toys were gathered, we went home, and I went to visit my cousin. When I went inside, I felt that the vibe of the house was not right. It felt like I couldn't breathe, and I would just randomly start crying out of nowhere, and I didn't know what was going on. The unsettling feeling disappeared when I left the house, and my parents later took the toys and disposed of them. I then got a chance to talk to the master about the experience at the house, and he explained that the energy of the spirits can be very strong and can be detected by people who are sensitive to spirits. After that, everything went back to normal, and my cousin was behaving normally again. This makes me believe in the spirit world, and some things are just unexplainable. When I was 20, I was living at home with my mom and sister, 13 at the time. My mom was out working a night shift, and my then boyfriend was staying over. We'd always had weird experiences in that house, but that particular night was the weirdest. It started with a quiet clicking noise somewhere in the hallway outside of my room. My sister's room was right beside mine. I assumed it was just something in the house clicking and ignored it. Then the clicking sound grew louder, coming from somewhere between my bedroom door and my sister's room. Then it was clearly in my sister's room. She yelled for me, asking if I could hear it, and both I and my boyfriend told her we could. She came racing into my room, almost in tears, saying the clicking noise was right beside her bed, and it was loud. We closed my bedroom door, and she made a bed of blankets and pillows on the floor next to my bed while we tried to go to sleep. After maybe half an hour, the clicking started again. The clicking began first outside my closed door, then within my room, and finally between my bed and my sister's bed. All three of us could hear it, but there was nothing to be seen. My sister started bawling, and we all hightailed it out of my room and decided to hunker down together in the basement, which was 3 floors down from our bedrooms. The basement had an old queen-size bed being stored there, so we all piled in with my sister between us, lights on, terrified. We sat there listening as the clicking noise made its way down all 3 flights of stairs into the basement until it was somewhere in the room with us. My sister and I screamed at it to go away. My sister was in floods of tears, and after a few more clicks, it stopped. We did not sleep that night, and my mom came home in the morning to find all 3 of us huddled in the basement, still terrified. The entire time, we saw nothing, and to this day, it has never happened again. My stories are largely broken up into the categories: poltergeist, alien, I think, and shadow entities. The poltergeist stuff is fun and a little creepy, the alien stuff I am fuzzy on, but the shadow entities are what scare me the most. When I was 4, my grandma was watching both me and my 3-year-old cousin. We were going to go to the basement and play, but upon reaching the top of the stairs, we both saw something at the bottom. I don't know what my cousin saw, but I could see a giant shadow figure in the shape of a spider. We both screamed and ran away. I hid in a closet, and my parents struggled to find me. A shadow figure began haunting me at night in my pre- and early teens. I'd say it was a sleep paralysis demon, but I could fully move. The first time I saw it, it poked its head around the doorway, and I fully sat up in bed, looked at it poking around, and freaked out. I felt a horrible chill run through my entire body. I quickly threw my blankets over me, put my head under my pillow, and lay there for probably 2 hours, quivering. It was another year or so before it came back, and this time was worse. Same as before, I saw a shadow creep into my room through my door. Out of fear, I buried myself under my blankets and pillows and lay there in horrible fear. After what I assume was a few moments, I felt an intense pressure on my feet, which began creeping up my body. Once it reached my chest, I was stuck and unable to breathe. It crept all the way up to my head, and I felt like my head was being compressed. I was so scared and trying to move until I could finally wiggle a finger. Once that happened, I felt some pressure lift off. I just focused on trying to move my body as if I was fighting something off of me. Most recently, I was running low voltage Cat 6 cable for CCTV in a garage. The garage had the same high ceiling as offices, along with giant concrete support beams. I pop my head into the hung ceiling and start looking around. At certain points, especially around the edges, some light pokes through, and I can see about 50 down to the other side. A shadowy figure resembling a human stared back at me, crouched as if ready to jump. I could see eyes, but I felt like we had locked eyes. I basically yelp, and my coworkers ask what's up. I tell them, unable to look away, that it looks like someone is crouching on the other side. I become too frightened, so I duck my head down and grab my large flashlight. There was nothing there. It very distinctly looked like a crouching human made of super black smoke. I have no idea what these shadow entities are. I don't understand why some look like a creepy person or why the only one looked like a spider. I also don't really know how to reconcile that when I've had symptoms of sleep paralysis, there is no paralysis except for when something is in extreme proximity. And a weird little note for everyone, I stopped having sleep paralysis once I moved out of the home I grew up in. It doesn't happen anymore. I'm convinced my old house was haunted by something that probably wasn't friendly. The house boasted a spacious and expansive garden, leaving me perplexed as to why no one had leased it for nearly a year prior to my arrival. I hadn't been there for too long when the feeling of being downstairs at night was just, no. Before it got dark, I'd make sure I was upstairs. If I had to go downstairs for any reason, my stomach knotted up, my chest got heavy, and I had an overwhelming feeling of being watched. About a year or so after moving in, I was in bed one night, door closed, and I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the other side. I assumed it was my cat and ignored it. A few weeks later it happened again. I muted my TV to listen and realized it couldn't be my cat because A, the sound was coming from too high up on the door, and B, my cat was asleep on my damn bed. Not too sure how long after this happened, but one night I was woken up by the scratching and then what sounded like someone hitting the door, hard, with an open hand, just, smack, in the middle of the door. Then I smelled it, something rotten. I pulled the covers up over my head and stayed that way all night. The next morning I decided I had to move. The lady who came to view the house a few weeks later absolutely loved the place and couldn't wait to move in. The landlord told her she was very keen for me to be gone by a certain time on moving day so she could move in, fine by me. I had to go back about 2 weeks after she was supposed to have moved in to collect some mail. The house was locked up, curtains pulled shut, so I asked my neighbor what happened to the new lady. Apparently, she stayed one night and never came back. That was in 2012. I still live in the area and past the house. It stood empty with the curtains still closed until earlier this year. I'd like to know how the new people are getting on in there. Ghost or glitch? About 3 weeks ago, around 11 p.m., I decided to go to bed. I closed my bedroom door and was about to lock my door. It had a chain lock, when I randomly got the urge to say F it and leave it unlocked. So I just kind of dropped the part that slides into the other part. I got into bed and began my nightly doom scroll, laughing out loud. Admittedly, I was intoxicated, so the 20 minutes may not seem like much, but believe me, I didn't realize this until a considerable amount of time had passed. I just so happened to look up, and I see that the chain is still swinging. As I'm staring at this chain still swinging, I realize that my phone is pointed directly towards it. So, naturally, I'm like, well, let me pull up my camera app to see if anything shows that my eyes can't see. I open up my camera app, and it kind of glitches almost. The screen kind of turns yellow and is grainy and immediately starts to show this tall white humanoid oval blob that is almost made of particles. It's smack dab right where a human would be if it were to be swinging that chain. It had a more concentrated center than the outside of it. And right before my eyes, like in seconds, it dissipated outwards in every direction. To add to this even more, in the weeks leading up to this, I started feeling weirder and weirder in my room. Like I was being watched by a man. I had a friend spend the night in my bed while I was away one night, and I mentioned to her that it felt like I was never alone in my room, and she immediately admitted she felt the same way. I also had been experiencing cold chills on the left side of my face, but the only window in my room was to the right of my face. There were no vents in my room either. I also experienced, between the cold chills and the camera thing, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up for the first time ever in my life. Every night since it happened, I tried to recreate what I did to try and get the same results, but I never got it to do what it did that night. I'm only just now getting the courage to share this because I was too afraid to hear that I might have actually had a paranormal experience. I've always wanted to believe. Cue the X-Files theme song. I moved away 2 weeks ago to a new city 2 hours away. So far, nothing creepy. What does everyone think? Glitch or ghost? This was the only ever unexplainable bad thing I've encountered. I've been working as the visitor services manager at the Harriet Beecher Stowe Center for 3 years. My office was on the main floor of a circa 1872 carriage house. I mostly sat at the front desk, gift shop space around me, a mini gallery behind me. This particular day it was a miserable, rainy/sleeting March Tuesday. We'd had no guests come through the visitor center or tour the house. A bit before 5 p.m. I sent the 2 guides to close the Stowe house. Window shades need to be closed, some doors opened, some doors closed, etc. I'm now alone in the carriage house. That's pretty normal. I was always alone when the museum was closed to the public. What was normal was the sudden stomping of feet I heard just above me in the guide break room. Someone big was stomping around and moving things. Heavy things. Stomp, 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 thump. Stomp, 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 thump. A month prior, there had been a break-in. Someone had come in and taken the cash from the donation box and the cash register while I'd been across the lawn at a meeting. So I immediately thought the same was happening again. But that didn't make sense. From my desk, I could see the main staircase, yet the door to the other one remained consistently locked. But the noise was continuing. Finally, I called up to the guide break room where the noise was coming from. The room should have been empty. It was a 2-way phone set to speaker. I could suddenly hear the stomping and movement much more clearly. There was someone up there. They sounded angry or upset. Stomped, heaving things. And then it came up to the desk. I could hear it panting. Moving papers. Frantic. I radioed security. Our security guard wasn't far away and marched up to the break room by the front stairs while I watched the back stairs. No one. Nothing. We had motion detectors. If someone had stayed hidden, we would have caught them. I know what I heard. I'll never forget hearing it through the home approach on the desk above me. Hear it. Breathe. I knew it was not good. Not safe. Bad. Something terrible. I've bumped into things a couple of times, always it was a curious experience. This wasn't. This scared me more than I think anything else has. It was evil. I went home shaken and sat in the Stop and Shop parking lot until my husband finished work that night. I was too scared to go home alone. We were traveling from western Kentucky to Florida for vacation. After a long day of driving, we ate waffles and other breakfast items at one of those all-night breakfast places, but when we looked for somewhere to sleep for the night, every hotel was full. When we finally saw a hotel lacking a lit-up no vacancy sign, it was a Days Inn in Dothan, Alabama. I needed to stretch my legs, and my game gear had died, so I went into the front office with my dad to get the room. The woman, worn out and barely contained by her hotel employee's uniform, told us, "We're all booked up." But her coworker said something like, "What about 229? She paused for a second, looked at me, then at my dad, and said, "Well yeah, I guess you could take 229. Would you like 229? Well, yeah. Why not? Sure." And so began the strangest night I've ever experienced. We settled in for bed almost instantly. My brother and I shared a room with my parents. Something seemed off about the room, but we were too drained to care. At around 2:30 in the morning I woke up to my mom screaming and my dad sitting straight up in bed. "There's a man in the room." Hey. Who are you? What are you doing in here?" We all woke up, and there was this dark figure of a large man in the room, standing over my parents' bed. My brother dove for the light switch, and the room came into this sudden, quiet focus. I remember thinking later about what might be a more appropriate or effective thing to say when you're encountered by a large dark figure standing at the foot of your bed. But in the moment, nothing was there. There was only a small TV, a mini fridge, and a mirror. We all sat there for a moment trying to figure out what just happened. My dad said, "We're leaving." And we were back on the road as fast as we fell asleep. Later on, my parents discussed it. My mother only saw a man. My father also saw a man and a dog. I just remember seeing shapes. We scoured the internet to see if anything weird had happened in the hotel that year. I even tried calling the hotel years later, but it had since gone under new management. We often find ourselves wondering what happened in that room. I rented a friend's basement while I was working in another state for about a year. The basement was only partially finished, with exposed studs for the walls and a cement floor, which gives you an idea of its condition. There was a lot of stuff in the basement, not quite hoarder level but more pack rat, I would say, very cluttered with stuff piling up. The house was located in a northern state, and when I first moved in during the summer, I didn't experience any issues at all. I mostly kept to myself, went about my business, and encountered no problems. However, the house, especially the basement, always had an odd feeling. As summer turned into fall, then fall into winter, it got quite cold downstairs, so much so that I basically lived in a hoodie and sweatpants. Even when I went to bed for the night, I kept my hoodie on because it was pretty cold. I began noticing some things happening around that time too, a constant feeling of being watched. I would see someone walking in the next room between the wall studs out of the corner of my eye, mood swings, just some weird stuff. To be honest, I look back at myself during that time, and I was acting completely different and very much not the same person I normally am. Most concerning and scary was the recurring dream I was having about a ghost. I was always in an unknown house, and this deformed, disfigured, female ghost would always jump out from behind a doorway or wall and scare the shit out of me. As usual in dreams, you can't ever move either, so when I would try to run from the ghost, I couldn't move, and she would always just be on the verge of grabbing me before I would jolt awake. The dream became so regular and familiar that as soon as I saw myself in the same unknown house, I would tell myself, okay, she's going to jump out and scare you, but that never helped, and it always turned out the same. The nightmare continued for about 2 months or so, until I couldn't take it anymore and told my friend that I was pretty sure their basement was haunted. They proceeded to tell me that I was not the first person to mention that, and there were belongings in the basement of a loved one that had ended themselves. Needless to say, I worked hard to get out of that house and a couple of months later did just that. I have never had the dream again, and my mood swings stopped, and I began acting normal again. Strange events in my home. I am a college student, and a year ago, I moved into a shared apartment located across from both a hospital and a church. The first few days, while I was in the living room, I thought I saw a black figure in the kitchen. At the time, I thought it was just in my head and moved on with my life. But then the dream started. I always dreamed about my room and felt like there was something there. I had a dream where I saw a doll on the table, and in another dream it seemed like there was something near the window. At first, I didn't even mention anything to my roommates, but one day they started joking about strange things that were happening in the house. Like, unexplained noises, taps that would appear out of nowhere, weird dreams, paralysis. There was even a day when one of them swore she heard me and another roommate talking, but neither of us was home. And the girl who lived in my room before had also witnessed some strange things. Anyway, throughout the year, these things continued. Strange dreams, paralysis, and so on. But the most surreal thing was one day when I was in the kitchen and saw the faucet turning on by itself, right in front of me. It was really weird, but I tried to ignore it and thought it could just be a water pressure problem. Over time, I realized something. When I smoke weed regularly, nothing happens. I don't experience any dreams or strange vibes. But when I drink alcohol, everything gets much worse. I decided to tell you this now because, in the last few days, 2 episodes happened that petrified me. We're on vacation, which means the apartment is empty. When I got back, there was an earring of mine, that I don't even wear, in the middle of the kitchen. Furthermore, on my shelf, one of the books was out of place. I always leave the Lord of the Rings ones on top, and it was out of place. The girls are traveling and haven't even been near the house in the last few weeks. I was the last person to leave before all this. I'm frightened, and I don't know what to do. Is it something supernatural? Or does an old resident still have the key? If anyone has any tips or knows what to do to stop these events, please let me know. Ever had an unexplainable paranormal occurrence? About 3 years ago, I had a friend stay with me at my apartment while she was visiting for a week. During this time, we slept in the same bed, and everything was pretty normal for the first few days. After about 3 days of her sleeping in my bed, I had something unexplainable happen to me. When I was trying to go to sleep, I was overcome by these horrific images. These images were gnarly, demonic, and out of this world. It would be like seeing an innocent deer walking in the forest that would turn into a carcass ripped in half with bugs and ooze dripping from it, becoming a faceless creature. This would play on a loop. I can't even properly describe how strange and demonic these images were. I remember the first night this happened, while I was next to her, convulsing and trying to scream the entire night without anything freeing me from these images. This experience lasted for the entire duration of her visit. When she left, I'd have these dreams from hell at least 2 to 3 times a week for the next few months. About 6 months later, another friend visited me and stayed in my bed. She was to stay with me for about 1 month. During the first few days of her visit, she said exactly these words at breakfast. "I'm so sorry to sound rude, but the last few nights I've been sleeping in your bed, and I have had these dreams that I could only describe as images from hell. I am really scared, and I don't think I can stay here any longer." Mind you, I never brought up to her the bizarre dreams I was having because I thought I was going mad. I was honestly extremely relieved when she said this, because I thought I was fully going mad. What she described is what I had exactly seen through my eyes too. That day, we saged and did a prayer in my apartment, which worked for maybe 2 months. The dreams continued after she left, so I did the logical thing and threw out and replaced my mattress. The demonic dreams stopped entirely after that. That was the creepiest, most unexplainable thing that ever happened to me. Time glitches. Has anyone ever experienced this, and what would it be called? So about a year ago, I was standing in my kitchen, rented house, had lived here 2 years, and I was looking out into the living room at my cat, who was on the couch. All of a sudden, it was like an old lady version of me was in my body, and she thought, "This looks like the house we lived in when the girls were kids, and that looks like Midnight, the cat we had then. The girls are indeed still growing up in this house, and the cat is Midnight." It felt as if my former self had taken over my present self. But if that were so, why would I have a memory of the event? Then, a week or so later, my family and I were driving on the freeway in Southern California. The 110 freeway, in fact. I discovered later that the 110 freeway is the oldest in Southern California. All of a sudden, I was looking out at cars, and they were all old. Like 1950s old. There was not a single new car in sight, and the freeway appeared antiquated and lacking in modern amenities. Then, after about a minute, everything returned to normal, resembling the present day. I do not do drugs, don't have any mental illnesses, and am a pretty normal person. I wasn't drinking, either. Nothing like that has happened since. Has anyone else experienced similar issues? I've looked up information on time glitches and haven't found much, just a couple of anecdotal stories. I want to learn more about similar events and their causes. A couple of years ago I had a spooky experience. I don't know what to think of it. Basically I was asleep, and I heard my voice, which didn't quite sound right. It sounded monotone, without emotion or bored, for lack of a better word, and just robot-like, and it told me, "It's 8:30, time to wake up." That definitely scared me. So like any normal person, I pretended I didn't hear it and tried to sleep, but then got really scared and decided to do as told anyways. At the time I didn't have a phone, so I checked the time through the microwave, and lo and behold, it was 8:30. What scared me the most about this is it was my own voice, but it was off. I feel like I could try to rationalize the rest, but this part I just don't know. Plus, when I used to live in the house where that happened, I had a few other paranormal experiences, which only scared me a bit more. I don't know what to think of this story. I want to be in denial, but it happened to me. And it's not the scariest story I have. I doubt anyone would believe the scariest one I have because I told some, and no one has except my brother because he also experienced part of it, kind of. Anyways, please tell me if you have any rational explanations because I still think of this today, and it creeps me out. When my grandpa was a kid, something happened that really creeped out my family. At his grandparents' house, his grandma had a ceramic cat figurine. It was tall, slender, and had these eerie emerald green crystal eyes. The cat sat on a shelf in the living room, almost like it was watching everything. However, my great-grandfather, Dave, hated that figurine. He always said it felt like the cat was staring at him, and he kept telling his wife to get rid of it. Then, when my grandpa was about 9 years old, Dave got really sick. He eventually passed away at home, and the whole family gathered in the living room to grieve and make funeral plans. My grandpa and his siblings were sitting on the floor, trying to understand what had just happened. That's when they heard a faint clack. At first, no one paid much attention, but then it happened again. Everyone looked over and saw the cat figurine wobbling. It started to wobble more, making that same clacking sound as it moved. The cat slowly began to turn, and then it started spinning faster and faster. Finally, it made a full turn, and its eyes ended up facing everyone in the room. Everyone sat there, frozen in silence. Then suddenly, my grandpa's dad jumped up, grabbed the cat, stormed outside, and threw it in the trash. It shattered into tiny pieces. I'm not exactly sure what happened afterward. But I do know that the whole thing left my family really shaken. Even now, more than 60 years later, my grandpa remembers it like it happened yesterday. In the end, the family decided that even though he was gone, Dave must have still wanted that cat gone. Who knows? Maybe he did. Back around 2014, I was a nanny to a little boy around 4 years old. His sister would come home from school in the evening, and I'd have them both until around 4 or 5 p.m. There were strange experiences in the house involving the kids, but the two that I personally experienced involved the girl who was 10. Now I am 5 feet 6 inches, and she was the same height as me with feet roughly the same size as mine, 9. One afternoon I was preparing the boys' lunch, and I dropped a piece of food on the floor in front of the counter. Now the front of the counter met with a short bit of wall that opened to the bathroom doorway to the right. When I bent to pick up the piece of food, there were a pair of purplish gray little girl's shoes sticking out of that piece of wall, as if a girl around 6 to 7 years of age was standing directly inside of the wall with the toes of her shoes poking out. I about fainted from fear. Another day when both kids were home, the oldest was probably on school break, I don't remember, the boy was sitting on the couch, and the girl had her backside perched on the edge of the kitchen table in the dining room. The living and dining rooms were one open space, and they were engrossed in a cartoon. I stepped into the bathroom to wash my hands after blowing my nose, leaving the bathroom door ajar. I happened to glance up into the mirror and saw the girl walk to the counter in the kitchen behind me. I turned around to ask her what she was doing, and she wasn't there. I walked into the living room, and she was still at the table watching TV. I asked her what she'd been doing in the kitchen because she'd clearly been by the sink, and she said she hadn't been in there. When their mom and I had a chance to talk the next morning, I told her about seeing her daughter in the kitchen and what had happened. Her eyes got huge, and she proceeded to tell me about the time they'd had a house full of family visiting, and all the kids were outside playing while the adults were inside talking. She very clearly saw her daughter come inside and walk to the kitchen counter. She called over to ask her daughter what she needed. Her mother-in-law was sitting in a different spot with a clearer view of the counter and asked her who she was talking to, and the mom said her daughter had just walked in. The mother-in-law said, "Babe, nobody's in there." "Yes, she is. I just watched her go over to the sink." "Babe, go look. She's not in there." Sure enough, the kitchen was empty, and the kids were still running around outside. Sharing a weird ghost story from my childhood. When I was a kid, I lived in the last apartment of a building with no units above ours. Despite this, I would often hear strange noises coming from the ceiling. The sounds were typically hurried footsteps, followed by a sudden thud, and what seemed like coins dropping onto the floor. Sounds were almost exactly the same as if they were recorded. Once I even glimpsed a white figure passing by my bed in the same apartment, but that's a story for another time. As a kid, I was too afraid to ask my parents about the source of these noises. I believed that if whatever is causing the sounds heard us talking about it, it would come after me. Additionally, my parents had a tendency to dismiss my complaints and ignore problems, so I remained silent throughout. Years later, as an adult and after I moved out, I finally confronted my dad about the mysterious sounds. He told me that some poor guy from the building next to ours was being raided by the police one day, so he tried to flee by running and jumping onto our building's roof, but he failed and fell to his death. It matched with the sound pattern I've heard every day for years. It's also a sad story because my dad said that the guy was just being arrested for some check-related issues, and it wasn't such a big case. It wasn't worth losing his life. I hope he found peace. I honestly have so many, including one scary night I shared here a while ago. But I think one of my scariest was in an old cemetery with a ton of its own terrifying history. For context, this happened at the height of the ghost hunter type shows many years ago. This place was off limits, so me and my buddy had to sneak in through a hole in the fence. We brought cameras and voice recorders for EVPs and were just genuinely looking to document some evidence because of this place's history. This cemetery had graves dating back to the mid-1700s, so it's pretty old, with hundreds of plots and dozens of mausoleums scattered around. Large Gothic monuments, all manner of different headstones, and two features that made it incredibly weird. Number 1, this is not in a hilly type of area. The surrounding town is flat for the most part with barely any large hills. Yet, for some reason, as you reach the back of the graveyard, there is a large conical mountain with the cemetery road spiraling around it until it reaches the top. And I do mean mountain. In the fall when the surrounding trees drop their leaves, You can literally see most of the town in one or two directions. Number 2, at the bottom of this mountain, just before the gravel road begins to climb/spiral around it, there is a large pond. Not quite a lake, but damn big and damn dark. You can't see the bottom. Rumors were that in the early 1900s a killer was dumping his victims into this oversized pond because of how deep and dark it was. No idea how true this was, but this place still gives me nightmares to this day. Anyway, the main experience, my buddy and I snuck in from the back and immediately followed the gravel road to the top of the mountain. At the very top, the area was flat like a plateau and contained many graves and monuments. I got to work snapping photos while he began trying to capture EVPs. Within minutes both of our devices, with new batteries, were dead. We had already heard of this phenomenon from others who tried to ghost hunt in this place, so we came prepared with extra batteries. After swapping out, we got maybe 15 to 20 more minutes, and both devices were dead again. The place was dark, really eerie, and dead silent. But there was a bit of beauty in the aesthetic under the moonlight. We decided to just hang out for a few, smoke a cigarette or two, and then be on our way since our equipment was dead. Looking down into the cemetery from up on top of the mountain, I noticed this tree with what appeared to be a white mist forming next to it, maybe 20 feet from the pond. While I'm staring at it, seeing if it's going to form a human shape or something, my buddy grabs my shoulder and nearly shouts, "Do you see that?" I said, "Yeah, the mist almost looks like a person." Then he does shout, "No. Not that." He yanks my shoulder slightly, turning me, and points. I saw it. What can only be described as a grim reaper. It hovered around the gravestones, a large black mass so dark it actually stood out against the surrounding darkness. It legitimately looked like an entity wearing a black hooded robe. Then it noticed us. It turned towards us and quickly took off in our direction, zigzagging from tombstone to tombstone as it made its way up the mountain towards us. We ran so fast down the back of the mountain, through the hole in the fence, and reached the car in what felt like seconds. We stopped at the car to catch our breath when my buddy's eyes went wide, and he pointed again. Just beyond the fence, darting between trees and the visible tombstones, was the black entity. Needless to say, we jumped in the car and never returned. My husband and I recently took a trip to Wimberley, Texas, and stayed at an Airbnb that was tucked away in the woods, about half a mile off the main road. It was peaceful and beautiful, surrounded by trees, and everything felt totally normal the first 2 days. But on the third night, something strange happened. Around 1:30 a.m., the TV suddenly turned on by itself and started playing a cooking channel. My husband turned it off, and we brushed it off as a glitch. The next evening, which was supposed to be our last night there, we got back from dinner around 6:45. My husband went to bed, and I decided to soak in the hot tub and watch the sunset one last time. At first, it was relaxing, but about 15 minutes in, all the birds and bugs suddenly went completely silent. I got this intense, sinking feeling in my stomach, like something was watching me, even though I couldn't see anything. Then, this overwhelming sense of terror hit me, like if we stayed the night, something awful was going to happen. I packed up as fast as I could and begged my husband to leave. Thankfully, he agreed, and we drove out that night. I've never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal, but I can't stop thinking about that night. Has anyone experienced anything similar in Wimberley or at a cabin in the woods like this? I'd really like to hear your thoughts. This feeling hasn't left me since. The night my grandma died, I had a really weird experience, but it was at 3:30 a.m., not 3. I randomly woke up to something hovering over me that looked like a black gas cloud. It was darker than the pitch black darkness of the room, but I could see a distinct outline of it. I've heard stories about people who had weird experiences the night a loved one died, but those all sounded positive and felt loving. This was the exact opposite. I've never felt such fear and terror in my life. I screamed immediately, so hard/loud that it hurt my throat and pulled the covers over my face. When I did that, I could feel that it left, so I immediately grabbed my phone and used it as a flashlight to search the room but didn't see anything. I lay there for a bit, and then I heard someone coming up the stairs, which turned out to be my former stepmom. After she went in her room, I rolled over and turned my back to where I saw the cloud, but I felt uneasy, and then it felt like a single finger charged with electricity touched the back of my neck. I decided to just ignore it and go to sleep. You'd think it was over, but unfortunately not. The next morning I woke up and mentioned it to my stepmom since I figured she'd listen. Turns out she had woken up randomly a bit earlier than I did and had trouble falling back asleep. She decided to let the dogs out and get some fresh air. She said when she passed by the door of the room I was in, the door started shaking uncontrollably, as if someone were trying to get out, so she stopped, watched it for a second, Then it stopped. I assumed this event is what actually woke me. I then had mentioned I screamed so hard that I hurt my throat, but despite the house being filled with family from out of town, including occupied rooms on both sides of the room I was in, no one heard me scream. I still don't know exactly what happened, but I know for a fact it wasn't sleep paralysis, as most people say when I tell them this story. About 6 months later, when I was at home halfway across the US, I woke up to another cloud in the corner of my room. I immediately shook my then partner to wake them up, and in doing so, I hurt them a little bit without knowing. But, unfortunately, by the time they woke up, it was gone. I've not had any experiences like this for about 3 years, but for a long time I'd wake up randomly, crying, screaming, confused, feeling like someone/something had been near me. Countless nightmares, sleep paralysis, and other issues plaguing my sleep. I'm thankful I haven't had issues, but it's always in the back of my mind. If anyone has anything similar or something, I'd love to know more. I've encountered a variety of experiences in life, many of which could be attributed to my active imagination, searching for unreal objects, or my eyes tricking me. But for this experience, I had multiple witnesses from both perspectives. At the time my husband, then boyfriend, and I lived in an apartment. Once a week, and we still do this, my best friend would come over to spend the night smoking weed and watching Supernatural. We have finished Supernatural, watched The Wire, and are currently working through Outlander together. She would usually text me when she parked, so as she walked to the door of the apartment building, I would walk down to let her in. You could only access the building with a key card, but a lot of times I wasn't quick enough, and she would just follow someone else in. Many times we would meet each other in the stairwell or lobby. So, this one time she texts me to say she's parked. I was cooking dinner or something, so I didn't go down right away. Again, not new, she would just follow someone in, and if no one was entering, she would call us. My husband and I leave the apartment to head down and get her. Now, what you need to know is that she has a lanyard of keys over her neck. She still has them, and they make a very specific noise. Even other teachers and students in her school know it's her coming down the hall by the sound of her keys. We hear her keys through the door as we approach the stairwell, so we think she's nearby. Well, we open up the door, and no one is there at all. We even looked up the stairs, because we both know we heard someone in the stairwell, but no one was there. We walk downstairs, go to the door, and she's not there. Well, maybe she went up the other staircase, which she never does, but maybe. So we go back up using the other stairwell. She's still not there. We get to our floor, and as we exit the stairwell, she is just waiting at our door. She followed someone in, went up the usual stairwell, and said she heard voices on the other side of the door that sounded like us, but when she opened the door to the hallway, no one was there. There was no way she went the route she did without us passing her. It's not possible. And we both heard each other on the other side of the door and were both super confused when we found empty hallways on the other side. I'm just glad I had 2 other people there to experience it, because no one would believe me otherwise. The house I grew up in was haunted. My parents mostly bought it for the in-ground pool in the backyard. The house itself was very outdated. I'm talking candle fixtures everywhere, red brick interior walls, and a 70s shuffleboard tile basement. My room in particular had this sickly, uneasy, suffocating feeling, the stereotypical something right outside my peripheral vision has its eyes on me feeling. I never felt comfortable sleeping on my own. I'd have panic attacks whenever I was in the house by myself. Caused a lot of sleeping issues for me that I went to therapy for. I was grabbed by the ankle in bed and saw a shadow of a hand on the wall. My parents went to see a movie one afternoon, and we had the neighbor's kids over. We were all in the basement, and the basement door slammed shut on its own. There was no draft, and it was not windy that day. My mom was up late reading one night and felt/heard something run by her, panting breathing. Another night she woke up feeling someone crawl on top of her chest. She assumed it was my younger sister, but when she went to grab to move her, nothing was there. My parents didn't tell me about this until way after we moved out. At the time, they would kind of explain away/brush off my own experiences because they didn't want me to freak out. It was a real holy shit moment once they did confess. That house had bad energy, generally speaking. My family had a long string of really bad luck upon moving in and in the years that followed, but once we moved out, our lives started improving. The person who bought the house from us got laid off very quickly after moving in. A handful of people have lived there since, but only for 1 to 2 years before moving out. We are still family friends with one of my old babysitters, and before I told her all of this, I had asked if she ever felt weird in that house, and she pointed out my room in particular as always feeling really off and uncomfortable to be in. I thought about it being carbon monoxide poisoning as a way to rationally explain what happened, but we lived in that house for 5 years, and I never felt any of the physical symptoms. I don't talk about it because I'm afraid of sounding like a raving lunatic, so this will be the first time it's not a throwaway. I and a friend were hanging out in Minneapolis, where I lived at the time. I recall experiencing a surge of anxiety, bordering on a full-blown panic attack. My friend said he was starting to feel the same way, so we left to go for a walk down by the Mississippi River, under the I-35 bridge, if I remember right. So we got away from all people. It was the dead of winter, February 12, 2011. Well, in the corner of my eye I see two people, a guy and a girl, and I nudge my friend and say, "There are people over there." They approached us, and the first thing they said was, "Hi, where are you from?" Instantly we knew they weren't human, and my friend announced Earth. They replied, "We are from where humans perceive their gods to be from." Now remember, it was the dead of a freaking cold Minneapolis winter, and the girl was in a skirt and t-shirt, and the guy was wearing a shirt style I had never seen before. They explained they were disguises to blend in with humans. About an hour of conversation, including questions such as how we keep time and our system of government, ensued. When they said it was time to leave, they took about 3 steps and disappeared in thin air. We were blown away, and we said to each other, "We can never speak of this because nobody will believe us, so this is the first time I am telling this story." I live in NJ around a ton of supposedly haunted spots, and I have plenty of creepy stories. All of them can be rationally explained except for one. I may have told it here on another account, but whatever. It was the summer of 2009, and my LDR girlfriend at the time was visiting for a week. I had told her all about the weird NJ locations near me, and she was pretty excited to see a few, namely, the Atco ghost. She was easily spooked, so she wanted to go during the day, which was fine by me since I'd been there dozens of times at night but hadn't actually seen the place in broad daylight. The probably made-up story of the Atco ghost goes something like this. In the town of Atco, there's this long stretch of road, Burnt Mill RD, with houses lining either side. One night, a kid who lived in the house at the dead end of the road was outside shooting hoops. Some drunk idiots in 2 cars decided to race from the other end of the road. One of them saw the kid in time and stopped, the other car hit and ended the kid. Both cars sped away, and now the ghost of the kid haunts the road, waiting for his killer to return, which is kind of Reddit-erded when you think about it. According to legend, you're supposed to drive to this fake chalk outline of the kid at the end of the road, kill the engine, honk the horn 3 times, and flash your high beams 3 times, and the ghost appears. Never works. The road is pretty narrow, and it's residential, so you really have no choice but to take it slow, and my ex and I did so as we drove down the road that afternoon. It wasn't remotely creepy during the day. I stopped at the end of the street so she could see the super spooky chalk outline, and then I did a K-turn and headed back, again, going very slowly. My old car didn't have any cup holders, so I had one of those Johns from Walmart. In the 2 outer pockets were my ex's cell phone and her cup from Starbucks, with a sippy lid, respectively. In the center pocket I kept a humble pile of loose change. At one point while driving back down the road, we both hear this weird vibrating sound, like a cell phone vibrating, except it's consistent, it just keeps going. We look down and see that the cup holder pocket holding my ex's cell phone is filled to the brim with coffee. I immediately pull over and stare dumbfounded as my ex frantically fishes her now destroyed phone from this inexplicable puddle of coffee. Her Starbucks cup, meanwhile, is still sitting snugly in the pocket opposite the one currently filled with half of its contents. There's not a single drop of coffee anywhere. The loose change between the now half-full cup and the small pool of coffee is completely dry. Nothing stains the armrest the cup holder rests between. She immediately laughs, and I take that as a cue to follow suit, but we're both clearly nervous and perplexed. Did you do this?" she asks me, only half serious. "No," I say plainly, and then for good measure, "Did you?" This just makes her laugh even more. Yes, she sabotaged her own cell phone. We spend the next few minutes just staring at the cup holder, hopelessly trying to determine how such an incident could have happened. At no point did my car exceed 15 miles per hour. Maybe 20. Maybe. In order for this to have happened, here's how it would have gone down. The cup, which has to be conveniently turned so that the sip hole on the lid is facing the opposing pocket, is jostled out of the pocket where it very snugly fits. It then tilts in just the right manner at just the right angle that it doesn't get a single drop of coffee on the loose change, or anywhere else for that matter, empties at least half of its contents into the pocket holding my ex's phone, and then moves itself back toward its original spot, falling snugly into place in the cup holder, all without spilling a drop of coffee anywhere. I have contemplated this scenario numerous times, and I find it implausible. To this day, I remain unable to explain how this peculiar event could have occurred. While I do not believe in the presence of any supernatural entities on Burnt Mill Road, I do think that certain locations possess an inexplicable strangeness that we have yet to fully understand. Just yesterday, my husband and I went on a pleasant hike along a paved trail. It was nothing too strenuous. Here is what I was wearing: important, sweatpants, a baseball cap, and a hoodie with the hood up over my cap. Almost at our halfway point, before we turned around to walk back, I felt a slight touch around the seam of the hood on my head. I thought my hood was just slipping since I am tall. It still could have been that way. Then, after turning around, just before we got to that same area, I felt my hoodie at the small of my back scrunch up and sort of lift to the left slightly. Even though I was walking at the same pace that whole time, I thought maybe my hips moved it up, you know? I immediately used my right hand to adjust it back down, and right as I was, I felt a strong tug at the small of my back. I started looking around but saw no one, and I freaked out for a minute and told my husband, almost in tears. He asked me how it felt, and I said like someone pulled my hoodie. He then gave it a quick tug in the same spot and said, "Like that?" I said no, so he tried again and gave a good, strong pull. It was exactly like that one. I then started trying to explain it away. There was a slight wind going from my slightly forward left to my somewhat backward right, so I suppose the wind could have somehow gone up the back of my hoodie when I lifted the hoodie hem, albeit on my right side, like a half inch from my body to adjust it. I ended up writing it off as the wind. When I was in bed last night, I couldn't help thinking about it again. I know what the wind feels like. It was blowing from left to right, and my clothes stayed the same. My hoodie is very well made, slim, and thick. In other words, I don't think it would catch a light wind that easily. On our walk, right after that happened, I kept trying to adjust my hoodie in all sorts of different ways to replicate the feeling, and I even tried to catch the wind in it, but nothing worked. And I thought back to right before the pull, where I felt my hoodie move up and a bit to the left, and then I immediately tried to fix it, and then a yank. What if my first movement was my hoodie being grabbed? Note, there were very few hikers and bikers on this trail and certainly no one else around when this happened. It wasn't a prank from my husband because he was slightly ahead of me, so I could fully see him in my peripheral vision, and he has never tried to scare me like that in all our 7 years together and definitely would tell me if he did. Furthermore, it was 50 degrees out. If the 50-degree wind went under my clothes and was even strong enough to yank me like that, I would be cold. Any thoughts? Not a believer in the paranormal, but there were a few minor experiences in my last home that lacked an explanation. My earliest memory of such things was when I would have been maybe 12, give or take a year. My room sat diagonally across the hall from my brother's room. From the corner of my room, you could just see into his. I was home alone, building some stuff out of Lego. I had this sudden urge to look into the hallway, and when I did, I saw one of my childhood stuffed toys, an Oscar the Grouch toy from a McDonald's Happy Meal, fly out of my brother's room and crash into my Lego construction. I was certain I was home alone, called out, and looked around. There was no one. And to top it off, that Oscar the Grouch hadn't left my wardrobe for literally years. So how he found himself in my brother's room and then being flung into my room is a mystery. For the remainder of the time my family stayed in this house, the staircase that led to the garage, an old wooden staircase, would creak and strain as if someone was walking down it. At least once a month I'd hear this, and I just put it down as a result of the staircase's age. Lastly, the house was 2 stories, built into a hill. So the top floor was the actual house, below was a 2-car garage and a sort of living room. However, connected to the garage was a foundation room, basically a room with a narrow walkway and exposed rock from under the house. Was largely used for storage. We would always get such nasty vibes from that room, and those vibes wouldn't go away unless we closed the door to that room. We jokingly referred to those vibes as Jeff the Ghost. He eventually became the reason for the creaking stairs, the Oscar the Grouch incident, and the various other small things that occurred in proximity to that room, things falling over, locked doors swinging open, and a constant drip from the ceiling, which apparently had no piping within. Now the thing that freaked me out about this is I have a cousin who lives in another state. He and his family moved into their house, getting it cheap because the previous owner hung himself in the living room. My cousin would tell me about these horrid feelings he'd get from that spot in his house. He'd tell me how he'd get goosebumps and shivers and the like. All the usual ghost presence cliches. Now he was unaware of Jeff and his goings-on, but when he came to my house, he said he felt those same vibes. Like there was something impossibly sad nearby. That freaked me out. We moved not many years after that. The current house also has a foundation room, which we affectionately refer to as the Minecraft room for reasons I have forgotten. No otherworldly, supernatural, or ghostly things have occurred within. I'd like to discuss and rationalize my multiple experiences. During my teenage years, I had multiple experiences in 2 house shares I lived in during university. The first house was a standard terraced property that had a basement. Obviously, we explored the basement area the first day we moved in, where we found this matchstick-like model of the house that had been put together, as well as old newspaper clippings from the 1970s. We thought nothing of this, but the activity just boomed. Shadow figures appeared because the house layout allowed you to walk in and access 2 rooms off the corridor. As you went down the corridor, there was a kitchen, and through it was the living room. You could see the living room from the front door. We all saw figures move in that living room all the time. The basement door would autonomously unlock and open, and the light would automatically turn on. All our rooms were locked when the drawers opened. My housemate in the room downstairs would come home to find all of her drawers open on a regular basis. All of the kitchen cabinets would randomly open as well. 3 of us shared rooms in the upstairs hallway. We would hear loud footsteps and people running almost every single night. We always thought the loud noises were caused by one of us until, after a few months, we asked each other and realized that none of us were responsible. Suddenly, there would be a loud bang on my radiator from the other side of the room, waking me up. In our second year, our group remained together, but those experiences were sufficient for us to leave that house and move to another one, believing it would be an improvement. It wasn't, it got worse. Upstairs hallway, footsteps just like before. I was on the toilet in the upstairs bathroom one night when I heard someone try the locked handle and giggle. I shouted out, thinking it was my housemates playing a prank, but the handle rattled louder and more aggressively. I shot up and opened the door. It was pitch black, and everyone was in bed fast asleep. My bedroom, voices and objects falling. I had a shelf in my bedroom, and during the night, items would randomly fall off it. I checked the shelf's fittings, and it was perfectly level. Even when I slammed the doors and windows, the items on the shelf didn't budge. This just kept happening. Then one night in bed, I'm just falling asleep and hear a loud, very audible exhale in my ear, so loud I feel the breath. I quickly roll over and see this human-like figure right by my bed, which swiftly disappears. Housemates hear voices. My housemates downstairs used to hear chatting in the living room at night. They would think it was us and text everyone. It never was. We would all either be out or in bed asleep. We would see shadows darting around the living room. One night we were all watching TV together, and we all saw this figure dart down the hallway towards the garden. I was unable to sit or stand in that room without having my back pressed against the wall. The taps in the downstairs bathroom, upstairs bathroom, and kitchen would randomly turn on and run without warning. I finally moved out of my third year to another property, and everything stopped. A few of the group had placement years, etc., so we split up. One of my housemates decided to stay on in that house, and new people moved in with her. I continued to visit, but the house left me feeling uneasy. The man who took my room had the exact same experiences as me. Everyone else also had their own. I often think about the people who lived in those rooms and whether they had similar experiences. I wouldn't say I'm someone who really believes in ghosts, but something really discerning happened. On Saturday, I was finishing my shift at the bar where I work at about 4 a.m., and I was coming down the stairs from the staff room and glanced back and thought I saw someone coming down behind me. I swear I saw black trousers and lace-up Vans. I looked back when I got to the bottom of the stairs, and there was no one there. And no one else upstairs. I assumed I was just overtired and imagining things and thought it was nothing. Today my colleague mentioned that there's a ghost in the building and that, one time, 2 managers were sitting in the bar when it had closed at about 5 a.m. and heard 5 loud bangs on the ceiling even though they were the only ones in the building. A beat passed, and there were 5 more bangs. They ran out and locked the building behind them. I was ready to dismiss my experience as imagination, but now I'm really scared. Any explanations or theories? This happened about 6 years ago, during a time when I was between jobs and renting a room in an old Victorian house that had been converted into 3 separate apartments. Mine was the attic unit, creaky wooden floors, slanted ceilings, and one of those pull-down ladders to access it from the hallway below. It was cheap, quiet, and honestly a little charming. During the day. The first strange occurrence began about a week after I moved in. Every night at exactly 2:46 a.m., I would wake up. I would awaken abruptly, my heart pounding, each and every night. There was no sound, no light, no reason. The sensation of someone observing me from the distant corner of the room was overwhelming. But whenever I turned on the light, it was empty. Then came the scratching. It was faint at first, like a mouse in the walls. But soon, it grew louder, and I realized it wasn't coming from inside the walls. It was coming from under the floorboards. And it wasn't random, there was a rhythm to it. Almost like tapping. Like code. I told the landlord, but he brushed it off. He dismissed my concerns, citing the old house and the presence of rats. But I knew better. I started sleeping with earplugs, lights on, trying anything to feel safe. It didn't help. One night, I couldn't sleep. I was reading with headphones on when I felt the temperature drop suddenly. There was a noticeable chill in the air. I took the headphones off and immediately heard it, breathing. Not mine. Someone was breathing deeply and wetly behind me. I turned, but nothing was there. I stood up, and the sound stopped. The room was empty. But then I noticed the pull-down ladder to the attic door was slightly lowered. I hadn't used it in days. I stood under it, listening. Something was up there. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found muddy footprints on the attic floor that led to the corner. And stopped, as if whatever made them had just vanished. I called a friend to help me check the space, but it was empty, except for something I hadn't put there, a tiny porcelain doll, with its face smashed in and red paint smeared across its hands. I wanted to leave, but I had no money and nowhere to go. The final night I spent there, I woke up at 2:46 a.m. again. This time, the scratching was on the ceiling directly above my bed. Then the breathing started again, right next to my ear. I couldn't move. Couldn't scream. My limbs were locked in place. It felt like something heavy was sitting on my chest, pressing down slowly. I could hear whispering all around me. A dozen voices, all saying the same thing over and over. Don't look. Don't look. Don't look. But I did. I forced my head to turn. And in the corner of the room, crouched against the wall, was something, a pale figure with a stitched mouth and black, lidless eyes that stared straight through me. It didn't move. It just crouched there. Watching. The next morning, I left everything behind. I walked out with only the clothes I was wearing. I don't even remember locking the door. To this day, I still wake up at 2:46 a.m., regardless of where I am. And sometimes, in the silence, I swear I can still hear that scratching. Getting closer. My gran used to live in this absolutely awesome, huge, 4-floor Victorian terraced house in a leafy suburb and was always full of stories about it being haunted, which, as a kid, I completely lapped up. The story was that before she moved in, there was an old lady who died because she slipped over in the kitchen and hit her head. When my grandparents first moved in, she said, there was still a bloodstain on the worktop. Anyway, my gran's friend reported that once when she was sleeping in the guest bedroom, she'd woken up to see an old lady standing at the foot of the bed. As a kid, mind blown. In hindsight, I realized that my gran was a master storyteller, and maybe some of the content was embellished, but who cares? Anyway, over the years I slept in that guest bedroom several times, and aside from the ridiculously loud plumbing keeping me awake, I never saw anything in there or felt anything. However, the tale is truly captivating. But I was up on the top floor one day, and something really unexplainable happened. Nobody ever went up there. It was stuck in suspended animation because the house was far too big for my gran, and by those later years, the house was just totally inappropriate for an 80-year-old living alone. For starters, the stairs presented a daunting challenge. Anyway, I was exploring the unoccupied rooms upstairs, which were a treasure trove of various magical items, including a massive model ship hidden beneath a blanket. I went into a room up there, and there was a weird buzzing noise coming from the top corner. Something made me think it was odd, so I took one more step into the room to investigate, and it was much louder. I took one more step, and it was deafening. The sound was so intense that it felt like it was directly in my ear. Fear gripped me so intensely that I sprinted down the stairs at a high speed, completely unaware of my surroundings. Subsequently, I remained silent and refrained from discussing the incident with anyone. It wasn't an apparition at the foot of my bed, or footsteps in the attic, or anything traditionally scary like that, but it was terrifying because I can still relive this in every detail, and I still can't explain it. As I shuffled forward, the sound intensified dramatically, and I felt an overwhelming dread and unbearable terror as if someone were screaming directly into my ear. I don't think I will ever be able to explain it. Unfortunately, because the house was rented, once my gran moved out, that was that, and last I heard, it had been broken up into student flats. My childhood home had a hallway that led to the bedrooms, and directly to the left of the entrance to the hall was the family computer desk. It wasn't a very long hall, and it was shaped like an upside-down L. The first door on the right was my brother's room, maybe a yard into the hall. At the hall's end, the bathroom was on the left and my bedroom was on the right. I was sitting at the desk finishing an essay, It was my sophomore year of high school, about 11 p.m. I could see my little brother in the hallway out of the corner of my eye. He was wearing a plaid shirt and jeans, which he often wore to bed to save time getting ready for school the next morning. I told him to go to bed, and he took off running down the hall. A little bit of time passes, and I see him again. I felt agitated, as older sisters often do, so I told him to go to bed again, but he took off running once more. He showed up in the hall a third time. Now I'm really mad. I yelled at him to go to bed, and when he took off running, I stormed after him. I knew if he was running, he was probably heading toward the bathroom, because his room was so close to the start of the hall there wasn't space to run to it. I made it halfway down the first part of the hall, stopping just short of the turn, when an overwhelming sense of dread filled me. I turned around and walked into my brother's room. He was in his bed, which is already surprising because I saw him run past his room. I pulled back his covers, and he was completely knocked out, drenched with sweat like he was when he was in a deep sleep. He wasn't wearing a plaid shirt at all. This whole exchange happened so fast he wouldn't have had time to change, but I checked his floor for the shirt anyway, and it was nowhere to be seen. At this point, my heart pounded rapidly. It was impossible for him to have changed and fallen asleep in such a short amount of time. I didn't go all the way down the hall. I don't know what little boy I saw that night, but it wasn't my brother, and I would rather not find out what it was. I saw so many weird things at that house. Tons of shadow people and inexplicable situations. Most recently, my mom, a huge skeptic, confided in me that she'd been swimming in our pool in the backyard, and every time she put her head underwater, she heard voices. It was so convincing that she popped back up to see if my brother or sister was talking to her, but nobody was ever there. It would be quiet above water, voices underneath. I don't think I'll ever know what was going on with that house, but there's definitely some sort of presence there. When I was around 6 years old, my parents and I were visiting my grandparents at their old farmhouse. It was a 2-story house, probably 100 years old, with a little door to separate the top floor from the main. There was one bathroom off an odd little cubby area that had a tiny dual laundry machine and the door to the basement. I was little and had gotten exhausted in the early afternoon from checking out the cows my grandparents had. My mom put me down for a nap in my aunt's old bedroom, the first room at the top of incredibly narrow stairs. After a while, I was woken up by a knocking on the little door at the bottom of the stairs and heard my grandma calling my name. I got out of bed and went down the stairs and through the door. I looked all over the main floor and couldn't find my grandma anywhere. I couldn't find anyone else, either. I was checking the bathroom when I heard her call my name again, saying she needed help with something. I heard it from the cubby area outside the bathroom. When I left the bathroom, I noticed that the basement door was open, which I found strange because it had been closed when I entered the bathroom. I heard her voice again from the basement, asking for help with something. I started going down the stairs, and the door slammed shut. Nobody was there, and the air felt thick and heavy. I had only gotten down a couple of steps at that time, so I ran back up and started yanking at the door handle and screaming for my mom. I could hear sounds from down below, but I couldn't see anything. The air was heavy, but luckily, daylight came through the window. By this time, I'm full on panicking, sobbing, screaming, and just ripping at the handle. It wouldn't turn. After a while, I gave up and just sat on the stairs and wailed. Some time later, I could hear my dad running around the house yelling for me, so I got up and pounded on the door, and he let me out. He told me when I was older that I almost knocked him over when I ran to him, wild-eyed and crazy looking. My parents had been outside the whole time with my grandma and her cows. Nobody had gone into the house so I could sleep. My mom and grandma had come inside by the time he found me, and my grandma told me kids should never go into the basement. Completely serious. I never went down there again and hugged the wall the bathroom was on if I needed to use the bathroom. When I was an adult, I was talking with my mom about this experience, and some of the others I've had, and she told me some of the things that happened to her and her siblings growing up in that house. The place was terrifying, and I'm relieved I won't have to visit it once more. A freakout delayed by years. I was taking turns riding a giant stuffed animal down a set of stairs with my sister at my aunt's house. When I went up after taking one of the many rides down, I noticed an old woman just sitting on the rocking chair at the top of the staircase and rocking very slowly. I had a 3/4 view of her from just a few feet away. I quietly crept back down the stairs so I would not disturb her. I was not scared, only surprised, as she was not there a mere moment ago. I was a small child, and I just figured it was someone else in the house. Years later, I told the story to my mom. I described to her exactly what I saw: an old woman, wearing a dark dress with lace, silver hair pulled back tight in a bun, rocking slowly. My mom was dumbfounded, I had just described my aunt's mother in detail, and I had never met her or even seen a picture of her. I was immediately creeped out. I can still see her in my mind like it was yesterday. Bonus story, in that same house, which was built in the 1800s, I was staying in a bedroom on the top floor, yes, the same floor where I saw my aunt's mom. Being at the top floor and having no attic, the ceiling slanted inward from a wall about 4 high on each side of the room. One of the walls featured a half-height door. Well, one night, that creepy-ass door started knocking, and the handle was being shaken in a way someone would try to open a lock or stuck door. During that incident, I was old enough to be absolutely terrified. That door by itself, without that happening, is creepy on a new level. My aunt did have a special needs daughter that lived in the house and died at a very young age. I grew up in a haunted house. I have dozens of stories, as do my parents and sister. My parents do not believe in such things, but they will tell you what they experienced. As a mature adult, I enjoy exploring the area alone at night. My kids and I used to spend the night and go ghost hunting when my parents traveled. Indeed, we were frightened, and we experienced some unusual occurrences. Freaky, unexplainable experience. This happened to me years back, and I've told it to a few friends, but they didn't really have much to say other than, "That's weird" or something along those lines. I have lived in the same house for 10 years now, and this only happened once. I have a few other strange stories, but I'll share them another time. This one still bothers me since it happened in my son's room, that he still uses. So my son was about 3 or 4 years old at the time. He's almost 10 now. I was cleaning his room on a beautiful spring day around the late afternoon. His dad was outside grilling, and my son was outside with him playing while he grilled. His room has 2 windows that are in the front of the house, so when you look out the window, you can see the full front yard. He had lots of stuffed animals, so I made his bed first, and then I picked up the stuffed animals and displayed them all cute and orderly on the bed. His room wasn't awfully dirty, so this was going to be a quick cleaning session that only took me maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I was picking up some dirty clothes off the floor, facing away from the bed with my back to it, with the front of my body aimed towards the windows. I felt something forcefully hit my back when I raised up from picking up an article of clothing from the floor. I immediately whirled around to see a stuffed animal at my heels. One of the stuffed animals I had just placed neatly on his bed. I expected to see my son running around the corner giggling, but I turned back towards the window and looked, and my son and his dad were still outside. I obviously got spooked, and to this day I have no explanation of what that was, and I haven't experienced anything else like that. Whatever threw that stuffed animal at me, though, threw it hard enough that it was as if they threw it as hard as you can possibly throw a stuffed animal. Harder than what a 3 or 4-year-old could have. I've only had 2 experiences in my new house, and both happened on the same night. October 10, 2018. It was a normal night, bed at 10 with both my dogs shut in my room, mom asleep across the hall, and my sister sleeping on the couch. She was visiting for around a week. Come 1 a.m.-ish, I'm woken by 3 loud knocks on my room door, so loud I'm still surprised to this day that no one else heard it. The first odd thing is that my dogs bark at everything, and they definitely would have barked at one of my family members walking to my door. The second odd thing is, my door doesn't latch. When my door is shut, I can push it open, no handle, from the hall, but from my room it must be pulled open. The knocks were so loud, they would have swung open my door, meaning they came from inside my room. Naturally, I push my dogs off of me and get up, assuming my sister is midnight snacking and curious where something is, or mom's having issues sleeping and wants one of my dogs. As I enter the hallway, the chilly air greets me, and I find myself alone. I walk into the kitchen, no one. I swing by the couch on the way back to see my sister out cold. I didn't bother waking mom since she used to have issues sleeping. The severity of what happened didn't resonate with me until morning, and back off to sleep I go. An hour or so rolls around, and I'm woken by another, singular, loud bang. Suddenly alert, I dash down the hall into the dining room, only to find my sister sitting upright on the couch, pondering the source of the noise. Too dark to find answers, I fall back asleep and awake with my alarm. I find my sister and mom deep in conversation in the dining room, and I ask what's up. Apparently my hanging whiteboard had been knocked off the wall, and the nail ripped out. I wasn't a believer before, but this not only turned me into one, it sparked an interest in amateur ghost hunting. Boyfriend came home, but it wasn't him. This happened a few months ago, and I've been meaning to share it here, but it honestly freaked me out so bad that I didn't want to write it out for a while. I'm curious about any similar experiences. Some background: I live in a college house, owned by the college and close to campus, with 2 of my friends, but my boyfriend has been a sort of unofficial 4th housemate for a while now. He's good friends with many of my friends, especially the ones who live in the house, so it's safe to say they know him and what he looks like extremely well. This is important later. Our house is directly next to a big parking lot that is fully lit with streetlights at night, like a grocery store or mall parking lot, that belongs to one of our college's sports facilities, and it's completely empty about 80% of the time unless there's a game or practice. This is where my boyfriend and any friends who come to visit will park when they come over. The night this happened, my boyfriend was at his fraternity house for an event, but was planning to come over to our house afterwards. Just me and one other friend were awake and both sitting together on our front porch talking, not drinking or anything of the sort, when we saw my boyfriend's car coming down the road parallel to our house in the parking lot. It's also important to note that my boyfriend has a very distinct car, foreign car, outside modifications, unusual color, and we live in a relatively small town where I have still to this day never seen anyone with the same car. I wasn't sure for a second that it was him, as he usually calls me on his way home from almost anywhere, and he hadn't done that, but as his car got closer and started to turn into the parking lot, I was absolutely certain it was him. Like I said, the lot is fully lit up at night, so not only did I see the car in full light, but I could see through the window enough to see it was him. We thought so much, so it was him, that friend, and I got up and started walking to the lot to greet him. She waved at him as he pulled in, but he just kept driving through the lot. As it would be in character, we thought surely he was ducking with us and was going to turn around, but we watched as he pulled out of the parking lot fully and drove down the road in the opposite direction he came. I called him immediately, thinking maybe he left something at the fraternity house or was just doing a really elaborate and now slightly annoying bit. When he answered, I was shocked to discover that he was still at the fraternity house, as evidenced by the background noise of music and conversations. Even though I could still see his car driving down the road, I asked him if he had just been home and left for some reason. He said he hadn't, but he was probably going to leave soon. He asked why, and I just told him I'd explain later and hung up. My friend was so freaked out she didn't want to talk about it and still doesn't like it when I mention it. We both saw him, but she definitely got a better look and swears on everything it was him driving. Hell, I know for absolute sure it was his car. We've had a few other weird experiences in this house that oddly enough center around my boyfriend, and it's hard to tell if it's more paranormal or a glitch in the matrix, but this one absolutely felt like a glitch, especially considering that him coming down our road and turning into that parking lot is a routine thing that happens at least 10 times a week. Guess the universe was just ahead by a few minutes that night and played on my boyfriend's coming home too early. An old personal unexplained experience. I was around 8 years old when the event happened. We live around Aeneas Valley, if you want to check it out on Google Earth or something. We're near the Canadian border. Anyhow, I had an exhausting day at my school and just wanted to leave it. I got home shortly after the painful hour and a half. I arrived home. I decided to take a path through our field. The field remains completely still to this day. Too many rocks. When I was walking up, our family was getting ready for a reunion, and there were campers in our field from our relatives. We had fun. So I walked up through our field. I reached our house and felt a strong urge to explore the field further. So I did. I went into our field and found a cow. But this is where it gets weird because the cow wasn't normal. More or less. The cow was dead, a bit too dead. The cow appeared to have suffered a severe cut down the middle. The slice was so clean that the organs appeared proportionate to each other. So clean. You could put bone against bone, and it wouldn't even look like it was cut. Only 2 of the legs and the head were almost surgically cut off of the body. After the sight, I, for some reason, grabbed both sides of the head and showed it to my father. It reeked, but I did it anyway. So I walked up to our house and showed him my findings. He looked disgusted and confused. He grabbed it out of my hands and put it in the trash. Weirdest part of all, I went back to the corpse, and it was still there. Just looked more decomposed. Even though it had been 2 hours after he took the head away from me. I went to one of our family's campers to show them, and they were there. It was weird. I was looking at it, and they acted like they didn't see it. The ducker even walked through it, no offense. I just kept telling him he walked over and into a cow corpse. But he didn't believe me and asked if I was joking. I then went up to my father to show him it. And it was gone, everything, the disturbed grass, the blood, the body, everything. It appeared as though the object had never existed. I asked my father to show me the cow heads in the trash, and he just replied with what? Heads? To this day, my mom believes me and even remembers it. But my grandmother, family, and father don't remember it. It was weird. Being near it, it was really cold all around it. A bit near our house, It was like 60 degrees Fahrenheit near it. It was like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. There was something that followed me home. I went to the park with my friends since it was the last day of summer. I was about to start the 10th grade, as I remembered that the next day would be the first day of school. I was awake every hour on the dot. Until 3 a.m., I saw something sitting on my computer chair. I thought it was my mom. It looked like her. It was dark. My vision is -2.20. I thought my mom was in my room. I thought mom and dad had an argument. The chair is 3 feet from my bed, and I am calling out to my mom, "Are you okay?" I started moving my feet and began sitting up. This thing stood up. It was tall and had a hunched back. It resembled a cloak of shadows made from a ghillie suit. It then jumped on top of me, and I started to scream for my mom. Mo. It covered my mouth, and I couldn't move my body. I was in a plank. I started to pray. I recited a portion of the Quran, and then I felt a release of tension. I turned on the lights, and I was in the corner of the room. I was terrified beyond belief. I was in that corner for 45 minutes. My room was cold as shit. I opened my door, and I went to use the bathroom. My mom saw me after I used the bathroom. I told her what happened, and she said, "You are always with your bullshit. Go to bed, tomorrow is school, and you think you're smart. Trying to skip the first day." I was dumbfounded. I slept on that couch for 3 months. That room was always cold until one day I got agitated and said, "Whatever is in here, I want you to leave." I came back home, and the room was warm. I slept with a night light until I was 23. I can't even make this shit up. My mom never believed me. When she passed, I told my dad, and he believed me. He said I don't make shit up. He told me stories about experiences growing up. He had seen stuff in his home. He saw some dark shadows in the basement. He could see shadows darting through the walls. Medicine cabinet doors open and slam shut on their own. Entities fly under doors. My dad said there are things in this world that you will experience, and it doesn't make any sense. But you cannot be scared, it's your mind that makes you scared. One of the hardest men I know. So about 3 years ago, I was going on a field operation with my platoon to do a long offset raid in search of a high-value target. This was all just practice for the upcoming deployment. This was a sea-to-land insertion, so we get on the Ospreys and make the flight over to the training area in Yuma. Now this is only supposed to be the long-distance movement through the desert from where we landed to where our intelligence found the enemy stronghold/position, and will go on all night. This is all planned and deliberate but set to simulate to be as real as possible. Well, we're a good 7 hours into patrolling right below this huge ongoing mountain ridge and stop a couple of times to eat, navigate, and rest a bit. So we continue to patrol forward, and it is late at night/early morning, and it's about 12:30 in the morning. It's painfully dark with no illumination, but we've got our NVGs on. Not like they're any good anyway. To my knowledge, I was following one of the mortar men that was attached to my platoon since he had been in front of me for this entire patrol. It was just a wee bit hard not to notice the mortar tube he had been carrying across his shoulders even in the dead of night, and plus, I could hear his footsteps in front of me. When patrolling, you check your sides and rear to make sure your buddies are okay. We had been going through a pretty vegetated area considering it was the desert but still relatively open. At this point our dispersion doesn't allow me to see the guy to my left or my rear, but I can see homeboy to my front just fine. I slow down a bit, thinking I'll let the guy behind me catch up and see my path so we can have a visual on each other. This point is where I'm glad I had my woodland trousers on. As I slow down, I see the mortarman turn the corner on particularly thick brush, and I lose sight of him. Well, I can tell by the sound of his footsteps there's probably a slight drop-off, as I can hear the gravel sliding down. Sound travels further at night. I grip my rifle a little tighter, anticipating that I might fall when I turn that same corner. Glancing around the brush, I see nothing. I'm paralyzed, it's just vast open desert. And that was it. No signs of the others that were patrolling ahead of me. That couldn't be right, there was no way that was possible. I don't think I've ever turned around quick enough in my life just to hope someone was there. No one. I waited to see someone walk up and tell me to stop ducking off or to hurry up, but there was no one. On top of that, there wasn't a single sound that echoed but the shift of my own boots. Who or what had I been following? I wasn't dehydrated, there's no way I was that tired, and hearing a whole different set of footsteps and not an echo reassured me I wasn't hearing things. Knowing that our last break wasn't that long ago, I knew we wouldn't have stopped, and if we had, where was the security position? It didn't make sense. I was alone in the desert, not having a clue how this was going to play out. After a good 5 minutes of frantically looking around in place, hoping I wouldn't get eaten by anything, I just looked at what direction I came from, shrugged, and started walking back. Sure enough, after walking for about 20 minutes, I notice an infrared flash, which immediately alerts me to the presence of a security point. Well, it turns out they had seen me with them the entire time and even did counts to confirm everyone was present. I get asked where I was, and I just look at my squad leader, still freaked out, and say I had to piss. I refrained from elaborating on the events that transpired. The scariest part was that it was 3:20 a.m., and the whole thing couldn't have taken more than 30 minutes. I never could figure out what happened, and I'll probably never find out. My sister was there, but not there. Hey, this is my first time sharing here. I'm mostly telling this story because it was so mind-boggling I can't resist the urge to tell anyone who will listen. This happened in either 2008 or 2009, but in order to understand the story, you need a little background. My sister Sharon has severe nonverbal autism. She's 4 years older than me. At that time I would have been maybe 19 or 20, and I didn't have a stable living situation, but at the time of the story I was living with my friend and his GF Darlene in their one-bedroom apt. I slept on one of the couches in the living room for a couple $100 a month. There were 2 couches that formed a right angle in front of the TV. My sister had a day program she would go to on the weekdays while my mom worked. The only problem was the program opened at the time my mom needed to be at work, so she would drop my sister off at wherever I was living, and I would watch her until a bus from the program would come to pick her up. This event happened every weekday. One morning I woke up delirious and looked over to the other couch. There was my sister just sitting there staring at me. She didn't look unusual or creepy, she was just sitting where she normally would and watching me. It's not uncommon for me to wake up in half-waking, half-sleep states where I kind of hallucinate, so when I saw her, I didn't really react and went right back to sleep. When I woke up later, I went about my day as normal. Some friends came by to hang out. Darlene was in college and had an early morning class. She came home later that day and asked me why my sister was there that morning because it was a Saturday, a day Sharon wouldn't be there. This obviously confused me, and Darlene said when she was leaving to go to school, she saw my sister on the couch watching me sleep. I didn't tell anyone what I saw because it was unimportant to me, so she couldn't know. The first thing I thought was maybe my mom got confused about what day it was and dropped her off at my house, but later realized what she did and came back to get her before I woke up, so I called my mom, but she told me that she and Sharon had been there all morning. It was incredibly bizarre, and to this day I'm not sure how the hell to explain it. It never happened again, and I still don't know. Glitch? Paranormal? It was my son, but, wasn't it? Last week, my 10-year-old son B got sick one night, vomiting, fever, etc., so the next morning I kept him home from school. I accidentally forgot to call the attendance line and report him absent. About half an hour after school started that morning, my fiancé called me from work, freaking out, asking where B was. I informed him that he was homesick, which my fiancé didn't know because he had left super early that morning for work. Apparently, the school had been frantically calling me, my phone never rang, and I had no missed calls, and then called my fiancé because numerous students and teachers had seen B at breakfast, served before school starts. B is always there early for breakfast, but he was absent from class when school began. Many students swore that they had seen B at breakfast, but B was acting weird and didn't respond to them. Very odd because B is very outgoing and social. It even escalated that some students had seen B running onto the stage in the auditorium and hiding. Teachers were using flashlights to search the stage rafters for him because he had supposedly been spotted there. One of his best friends even called B from school that morning because she was worried, and B's phone never rang. She even texted him also, and you guessed it, no text was received. The police had even been notified and were en route to the school. Until my fiancé called me, and I called the school immediately to inform them that B was homesick. I have tried to obtain more details about all this, but even the school secretary seemed weirded out about it and was just like, okay, well, glad he's okay. Must have been another student that looks like him. From the info that I have gathered, nobody actually spoke to B that morning because he ignored us and just stared down at his food tray. When asked about what he was wearing, all I got was a hoodie and sweatpants, his usual everyday attire. Bottom line, this whole thing really freaked out me, his friends, and even his teachers. Please help. Any idea of what happened? When I was younger, I lived in a very old house. It was across from a church with filled-in underground tunnels that monks used to pray. When my brother was just learning to speak, my mom had him on her bed drying his hair. In her bedroom there was a small staircase to a third-story gallery, beside the attic. My brother happened to see me deadpan, staring at these stairs until he said, while pointing, "Look, Mummy, The men are walking up the stairs. My grandfather told me the monks likely used the gallery to pray. There's more. My grandfather was painting the bathroom when we moved in, but the moment he stepped inside, he was hit with a foul smell, which to this day he claims was the nastiest thing he'd ever smelled. He felt a presence in the room and asked politely to leave him alone aloud and that he was simply trying to paint the bathroom for his daughter. The smell instantly went away. I have one story from my own experience that my mom can't remember, but I do. I was asleep, clutching my mom's arm, around the age of 4 to 5, and I woke up in the middle of the night. I opened my eyes and looked to the window, where I saw a clear face staring at me. Too young to understand the severity of the situation, I simply asked my mom, "Mummy, what is that man doing in the window?" And she said, "It's just the window cleaner. It's fine." Her reaction fills me with dread when I think about it. She must have been so frightened she lied to protect me. I still remember what the face looked like and have always wondered what the duck it was, paranormal or not. A few years ago, I would stop several times a week at a gas station on my way to work. I would chat with the same attendant and the other regulars who came in early. She knew my cigarette brand and would have them sitting on the counter for me when she saw me coming. A man would usually show up around the same time and grab a few energy drinks. We would exchange pleasantries about work, our spouses, and pets. I didn't always get gas there because I worked over the state line, and it was cheaper in the other state. Around this time I went through a divorce and switched jobs, which meant that stopping at this gas station was no longer a part of my normal routine. Around a year later, I was driving by the area with someone and noticed that not only had the gas station shut down, but been demolished and the area had grown over in a quick time. I said something about how the area had been naturalized very quickly and was met with confusion. According to them, there had never been a gas station there. After this exchange, I asked others, and they all agreed that nothing had ever been built on this land. I'm sure it was the right place because it's located on a main road, right across from a shopping center, no mistaking the location for any other place. So what happened? Was it a haunted gas station? Parallel universe? Is there a glitch in the Matrix? I have no idea, but it has bothered me ever since. Some weird stuff is happening in my home. Any help would be greatly appreciated. So about 2 years ago, Memorial Day 2021, I was out at an Airbnb with some friends in Iowa. On that trip, I was sitting in a hot tub at night and saw, as vividly as the person sitting next to me, an old, bald man in a button-up standing underneath the deck we were near looking at us. I asked the 6 people I was with if they could see him, as I was shocked, and they each said no. I freaked out and sprinted inside. They all thought I was crazy, so did I, until I saw him briefly near the woods by the house hours later. I haven't seen him since, but some weird shit has been happening. Shortly after that trip, I had a jar of olives that somehow lost all of their juice overnight. I enjoy the occasional martini, which is why I noticed. There was also a morning where my bathroom sink was running when I woke up. The sink that was running was the faucet that I never turn on in a double vanity in an apartment. Shortly after my wife and I moved apartments, nothing to do with that, just so happened to move. Nothing out of the ordinary happened for about 8 months, then one night a glass on her nightstand started spinning like someone had knocked into it or spun it. Tried to recreate it with pillows, knocking into it, bumping it, etc., but I couldn't recreate it. Moved again, just moving, into our new home about a month ago. Within the first week of moving, I had a spoon knocked off the counter. Tonight, I had the weirdest experience apart from the ghost I saw this far. We were on my deck, and our basement light turned on by itself. This light is only able to turn on via one switch and is not on a timer. After confirming that there was no way I or my wife could have turned it on, I started to clear our house to make sure no one was in it. When I got to our garage, I was looking in my wife's trunk, closed the door, turned to my car to look in the window, and my car alarm went off. I was still about 5 feet away from it, there were no loud noises, and my keys were upstairs. My alarm has never gone off ever, let alone without anything causing it. At this point, I'm freaked out beyond belief. I'd be grateful for any ideas on what this is or how to fix it. I haven't encountered anything like this in my life, except for the occasional bump in the attic during my younger years. Moving is definitely out of the question, as I recently purchased my dream home. Thank you to everyone in advance. The haunted house that still whispers. There's a big old house in San Diego that looks calm from the outside. However, its interior is filled with chilling tales. This property is the Whaley House, built way back in 1857 by a man named Thomas Whaley. He wanted to make it a lovely family home. But here's the creepy part, he built it right where a man named Yankee Jim was hanged for stealing a boat. The locals claimed that the place had a curse from the very beginning. Not long after the Whaleys moved in, they started hearing heavy footsteps. But no one was there. They believed it was Yankee Jim's ghost still pacing the halls. Sadly, the Whaleys faced a lot of heartbreak in that house. People claim they can still hear their young daughter's little giggles in the rooms, despite her death from illness. Some even say they've seen her. Later, the house served as a courtroom, a store, and even a small theater. But the spooky stuff never stopped. People who visit talk about cold spots, strange smells like perfume, and shadows that move when no one's around. Today, the Whaley house is open to the public. It's a museum now. But many say it still feels like the past hasn't left. The walls seem to remember everything. And if you stand quiet enough, they just might whisper to you too. I'm not sure anymore if this is a ghost story. Many years ago, my wife and I were going to a memorial service for a coworker of hers at a church in Estes Park, Colorado. My wife was an avid viewer of the Ghost Hunters TV show and had various paranormal interests, so I suggested that we turn our trip into an adventure by renting a haunted room in the Stanley Hotel for that night. It was all arranged. We were going to bring voice recorders and cameras. After the service, we got to the hotel a little early before the check-in time, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. We went to check in, and we were told the room was ready and we should get our bags, take the old elevator to the 4th floor, and go down the hallway to the left to our room. We did, and as we got off the elevator, I looked down the hallway to the right and thought it was odd that there was a woman standing, watching 2 kids seemingly playing some sort of game right in the middle of the hallway. It caught my attention for just a second as we continued to leave our room. We had plenty of time for her to go shopping in Estes and get some dinner at the Stanley before we had a ghost tour of the hotel around 9 p.m. We did have one of the haunted rooms, and while we were inside, a tour did come by, and they stopped outside the door, and we could hear the description given by the guide about how the 4th floor was where the children were watched during the heyday of the Stanley. Our room was haunted by a small boy. Everything was going perfectly for her, and I felt good about suggesting it. Eventually it comes time for our ghost tour. It was a pretty good-sized group, and I would generally stay in the back so folks more interested in the stories than I was could hear better. Eventually we got to a room on the tour, on the 4th floor, right next to the old elevator. I am out of the bunch looking around, and I look at the other hallway, and it is completely blocked off with plastic and caution tape. So now while the guide is talking, I am staring at the old elevator and realize there are only 2 ways to go when you get off the elevator. Left to the hall where our room was or go right to the hall where I saw the kids playing, as in go right to the hall that was blocked off to entering or seeing down it. So I pull my wife out as the group is ready to move on and ask her if this is the elevator we came in on. She says yes, it's the only one. I asked if she looked this way when we got off. She said no, we were told to go left. As we are standing there with me trying to get things straight, a man, a worker, comes out from behind the plastic, so I ask him about the plastic. It had been blocked off for about a week as the rooms were getting some renovations. I looked behind the plastic, and indeed, the hallway was littered with debris, tools, and supplies. I went a few years thinking I had seen some Stanley Hotel ghosts at 2 in the afternoon, hours before I even realized it. But it finally sank into me that how could I see ghosts in a hallway that wasn't the hallway as it actually existed that day? My family and I moved into a new, split-level house back when I was 7 years old. It was a cheap rental, not very nice, but not terrible either. It wasn't particularly old, so frankly I'm not sure why I encountered what I did there. On the very first night after my family and I moved in, we all slept together on a mattress on the floor of a room in the basement that I had always hated. That was the room where the feeling of eyes boring into you was strongest. I called it the blue room given the deep blue color of the walls. I, my mom, and my 5-year-old brother were lying on the mattress in that order from left to right in the blue room. I've always been a stomach sleeper, and that night was no different from any other as I slept stomach down on the bed. My mom and brother were fast asleep on my right, and I was drifting in and out of it, too creeped out to fully sleep. The creepy staring feeling wherever you went was there from day one, and so was my hatred for that house. As I was drifting in and out, I felt 3 taps, tap, 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 on my left shoulder facing the empty space in the room. At first I thought it was my mom and groggily asked, "What, Mama?" But once I woke up a little more, I looked to my right to see my mom facing away from me, fast asleep. That's when I realized what had just happened, and when my dislike for the house solidified. We lived in that house for several years, and every single night I would be sure to be sleeping in the same room as someone else, as I refused to be alone. Every day and every night I could feel that prickly feeling of being stared at by something I couldn't see. It never really ceased, and it always felt stronger the closer you got to the blue room. About another year later, I was attempting to sleep in a different room, again next to my mom. She was on the left side of the bed this time, whereas I was on the right. Again, I was nodding off in the position I always did, on my stomach, when I felt another 3 taps on my right shoulder facing the empty air near the doorway of the room. This time, after the tap, tap, I heard my name, Anna, called in a raspy, drawn-out voice. I had many other things happen to me in that god-awful rental house, and for some reason, the activity always seemed to be centered on me. The only odd thing my family experienced is when I walked to the downstairs only to reach the bottom landing and have the light bulb overhead explode. The light was not even on. I stood there with glass raining down on me while my mom and brother stared at me in disbelief. R.I.P., Blue Room, -11/10 for that house. This happened to me 7 years ago, and I never really got any answers. All I know is that it has completely changed the way I view the world. I figure it's time to share my story and see if someone else on here has had a similar experience. I'd love to answer any questions because I remember it like it was yesterday. I was 18 years old, and I was with my family visiting my brother, who was studying abroad in Rotterdam. Just for reference, we were staying at the Hilton in Rotterdam. One night, we went to dinner, and my mom discovered I had gotten a new tattoo on the back of my neck. She began to make mean comments about my tattoo and mocked me in front of everyone at dinner. I got the tattoo for my father, and my mom and I had a bad relationship, so I didn't feel comfortable telling her it was for my dad in front of all these people. I got upset and ended up leaving dinner early and going back to the hotel to cool off. On my way back, I had some anxiety thinking about how my mom was never going to accept me and that even 5,500 miles away from home, I still felt trapped and would never have a positive relationship with my mother. It was a bit more anxiety than usual, but nothing over the top, and I got over it like I always do. My family finally got back to the hotel room, and we watched some TV before going to bed. My parents went to sleep in their room, my brother was on a cot in the main TV room, and I slept on the couch in the same room. 5 minutes after turning the lights off, I lay in bed facing toward the back of the couch, just thinking about the night. I rolled over toward the outside of the couch, and to my surprise, I saw a woman standing through the small part of the couch. She wore her blonde hair pulled back, with 2 tiny strands framing her face. She was wearing a beautiful white spaghetti strap dress, and she was really pretty. I thought she looked about 25 to 28. She was transparent, standing through the couch, glowing, I can't remember if it was blue or white, and grinning at me softly. She was standing about 2 feet away from me, just staring. Right when I saw her, I was shocked. I was in no way religious, and I did not believe in ghosts or anything, but that, of course, changed the moment I saw her. I knew not to scream because I've learned from horror movies how that ends. So, I stayed quiet and just stared at her for 15 seconds, just thinking to myself, I can't believe this is happening to me. She then let out a little giggle, seemingly amused by my shock, before turning to the side, taking 2 steps away, and disappearing. As if that wasn't crazy enough, as soon as she disappeared, the most intense euphoric feeling overwhelmed me. I felt unexplainable peace. I didn't even have the capability to question anything that was happening. It was like it wasn't even me anymore but just this unbelievable sense of security and love. I had no fears, not even a sense of self. It felt like I was floating. Now, as if that wasn't crazy enough, an idea popped in my head. But it wasn't my idea. I hate to use this word, but it's as if the ghost telepathically said to me, "You're okay, you're safe, I'm watching you, now go to sleep." I was still in this incredible trance that I didn't question what was going on. I just remember thinking to myself, okay. I then turned over and drifted off to sleep. I woke up the next morning, recalled the events, and immediately told my parents. I didn't have any alcohol or any substances, I was totally awake and not worn out by any means, and I'm completely mentally stable. If this helps, I have done some drugs since this experience, and nothing will ever come close to what I saw and felt that day. I am very doubtful it was a hallucination. It was exceptionally real to me. I just need to know what it means or what it was or if anyone else has experienced anything similar or how I can maybe see if she can come back. It was the most profound experience, and I feel fortunate to have experienced it because it has now made me pretty damn open-minded. Weird incident at work. Paranormal, or Matrix glitch? Today at work, I experienced something I can't explain and have no answer to. I am not a huge believer of we're living in a simulation, but it's hard not to agree with that after today. I am an electrician, and I worked with my brother and the new guy, who we can call Daniel. Daniel was downstairs cleaning, and this was at the end of the day. We wanted to get the heck out of the job site. I was in bedroom 1, and my brother was in master bathroom. Then I heard footsteps going down. I assumed my brother was done with what he was doing. I was working on putting a light fixture up till I heard my brother calling me from master bedroom. I found it weird because I just heard footsteps going down, and yes, it was just me, Daniel, and my brother on the job site. Then I went to the master bedroom and saw my brother. Was my mind playing tricks on me? I heard footsteps going downstairs, and I know it couldn't have been Daniel's because he was downstairs, and even if it was him going upstairs, he would have said something, and plus he told me he didn't go upstairs after we had lunch, and he promised and seemed serious. Also, you can tell the difference between footsteps coming up and downstairs. It 100% sounded like it was downstairs, but when I walked into the room, my brother was there, and he told me to look at how he was installing an outlet, something I already knew how to do, so I found it weird. Then he just stopped. Froze in time. I thought he was waiting for me to give him something, and I said, plate right, and still didn't say anything. I thought he was messing around, but he stood there. It felt like a minute, no facial expression, nothing, but whatever, so I assumed he needed a plate for the outlet he was installing, and then when I went downstairs, Daniel told me, "Are you done up there?" And I said, "Just one more light fixture, and he, my brother, is doing one last outlet." Then he said, "Really? I thought he was done 10 minutes ago." And assuming this guy was new, he didn't know, so I said, "Not yet, almost. He is doing an outlet." Then he gave me a look. "What do you mean?" "He is outside putting stuff in his van." Then I went outside to surely see my brother there. How was that possible? He was just upstairs. And I asked, "Did you do that outlet already?" He said, "What outlet?" I said, "The one upstairs you had me look at you do." He said, "I don't know what you're talking about," and after that I didn't want to look like a fool, so I just started to clean up. I was kind of creeped out and had Daniel come upstairs with me to clean up, but I just wanted someone there with me. Then when I was done doing the light fixture, I wanted to see if that outlet was done, and to my surprise, nothing was touched, and I could have sworn he had already stripped the wire and had the wire already hooked up to the outlet, and when I left, he was screwing in the outlet until he completely stopped, and then I cleaned up and had to ask him again. "Did you not want to do that outlet in the master bedroom by the window?" And he told me, "I didn't even get to the outlets today," and I asked, "Well, the one you were going to install, did you just take that outlet off?" He once again said, "I didn't, nor have I even done any type of outlet today," which was true. I then told him what I experienced and laughed and just said, "You need more sleep." My brother isn't the type of person to mess around with me, especially how confused, and it was making me go crazy. I can't explain what happened, but there can be many things to explain what happened. Am I the one who is going crazy? I am extremely paranoid right now and can't sleep. I've been looking around my room in bed, waiting for something or someone to pop up. I'm 34 now, and I still wonder about what this was or why. I had a cousin named John when I was younger. We were never particularly close, but we spent a lot of time together with all of the other kids when we were at family events. We enjoyed family game nights, barbecues, and celebrated holidays as a family. Once I and my family were invited to his little sister's softball game. We had a good time, but afterwards all of us kids kind of goofed around in the parking lot as the adults stood around talking about adult things. I don't remember what we were doing exactly, just that we kids, my siblings and his siblings, were all having a laugh when out of nowhere a thought popped into my head. The thought came at me casually and simply. Like, there was a sort of calm about it. In my head I thought to myself, John's going to die. I was 12 at the time and didn't know why that thought came to me. I remember shaking my head in that parking lot because who thinks that out of nowhere? It stumped me, but strangely it didn't scare me. I guess because I didn't think anything of it. Kid me just thought I was being weird because, of course, John isn't going to die, I told myself, he's John. John was 13, and in my head 13-year-olds just didn't die. That wasn't the world I lived in. But I remember watching him and his family load themselves in the vehicle and drive away that day. I didn't know it then, but it would be the last time I saw him alive. Later that summer, I went to sleep one night. This was back in the 90s, and my family didn't have cable, so it was still back when, at a certain period, if you left your TV on in the wee hours of the morning, you would get a screen full of either color bars or white fuzz. I left my TV on this one night, and for some reason on this night I kept tossing and turning. It felt endless. I just couldn't rest. Eventually, for some reason, I sat up and stared at my muted TV of white fuzz for a few minutes. According to the small clock on that old TV, it was a little after 3 a.m. After those minutes I laid back down and drifted off. This time sleep came easy, and I slept fine. The next morning I woke up and didn't think anything of it. I made myself a bowl of cereal. Captain Crunch. And watched the TV in the living room. It was 1997, and it was the morning that Gianni Versace had been ended on his front steps. I remember the news footage of bloody steps. I just mindlessly chewed and watched until my mother came in with a phone in hand. "John's dead," she told me. I didn't know what to do or say, so I just continued to eat my cereal as she walked into another room and resumed her phone conversation with other members of the family. Automatically my mind went back to that day in the parking lot of the softball field when that crazy random thought had rushed through me: John's going to die. I didn't know what to do with that, but even at 12 I knew it was ducked up and weird. I didn't say anything, though, because 1, who would believe me, and 2, even if someone did believe me, I didn't want to upset anyone. Especially his mother, my aunt. Besides, I told myself, it didn't change anything. He was still gone. John died due to gun violence, and while my parents never told me the full story of how it all went down, a week or so later I did read about it in the local newspaper. It gave more details that family members hadn't given me. According to what the paper said, John died a little after 3 a.m. That night, I couldn't sleep and just had to sit up and stare at my TV for some reason. Was that when John passed? I still wonder. It was the first funeral I ever went to. I remember watching my aunt fall apart. Losing her son like that broke a part of her, and that broke a part of me. I loved my cousin, and I love my aunt. I've told a couple of very close friends about this, but never any family members. I don't want to unsettle them or think that I'm making it up. I also don't ever want to do anything that would ever hurt my aunt. All I know is that this happened, and even though I somehow knew it was going to before it did, me knowing didn't change anything. She still lost her son. John still died. Me telling them this wouldn't lead to anything but hurt for the family. I still wonder, though, why I thought what I thought on that day in the parking lot. Why it came to me like that. I wish it never had.